Welcome everyone. It is July 28th. It is 6:32 p.m. This is a regular select board meeting. This is a hybrid meeting. I am joined by Mary Layton and Herb, board member Mary Layton, and then our town manager Herb Durfee and his assistant Miranda Bergmeyer, and several members of the public here in Tracy Hall, and then other board members Marcia Calloway, Rob Gear, and Claudette Bouchou are joining us remotely. So I just added there. Okay. I should also confirm that as a hybrid meeting that we have provided access for anyone who's looking to get into the meeting remotely, and that we will today, because I can't see all of our faces. We can't see all of our faces. We will likely do roll call for most folks. Okay. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand. Let's see if can we see all your hands clearly? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, great. So the next item on the agenda is public and select board comment. So we invite folks both in the room and online. This is wonderfully trippy to see sort of actually a very full meeting in both senses, are invited to speak to any item that's not on the agenda. So, anyone like to speak for items not on the agenda? And so it's just like sort of the olden days. You can sort of, the mic will pick you up and you can just sort of sit there. Yes. And just name and locatable address. And,
yes.
Yeah,
I'm Nancy Osgood, 191 Futrell Road. And I would like to comment on the bread ovens at Barrett Meadow. I'm not very good at extemporaneous speaking, so I have written a letter to the select board and I will give you a copy of it, Roger. So dear select board members, let me say at the outset that I write as a concerned resident and not on behalf of the Norwich Historic Preservation Commission, of which I am a member. I am dismayed that we unnecessarily lost an important asset and bit of Norwich history when the wattle and daub portion of the aptly named beaver oven that Dale Heisler crafted in 1985 was removed. A new oven is now resting and curing on the foundation that Heisler built, thanks to the partnership between King Arthur Flour and the Norwich Rec Department and the work of volunteers. That Heisler's oven was not properly used and cared for after Suzanne Lupien stopped using it to bake her famous wood-fired bread, perhaps 8 years ago, is what I find so galling. The town failed in its responsibilities to care for its assets. I wanted to learn more about the oven's history and Dale, so I Googled Dale Heisler and found the July 23rd, 2017 article by the Valley News reporter John Lippman. He sketched Dale's life and wrote about the 50 people who had gathered at Barrett Meadow that day to dedicate a memorial plaque in his memory. From the article, I learned that Heisler had lived on Larry Lane in Norwich in the 1980s, and it was during that time that he befriended Truman Barrett, who owned the land that is now Barrett Memorial Playground, an asset of the town. It may not surprise anyone to learn that according to the Valley News, Heisler wrangled, that's Lippman's term, with both Barrett and the town for 18 months before determining the exact location for the oven. With that matter finally settled to construct the oven, Heisler drew on his skills gleaned as a third-generation stonemason and from studying 17th century Quebec cloth stone bread oven construction. John Moody, who was quoted in Lippman's article, said that Heisler, quote, had learned from Welsh masons he had consulted about the correct method to mix wattle and daub, and that, quote, if you want this to be here in 1,000 years, this is the way you do it. Undoubtedly, because of misuse, the wattle and daub lasted 36 years. This despite the detailed manual that Suzanne left with the town, so that everyone would know exactly how to use and care for the oven. It troubles me greatly that the oven was allowed to deteriorate, its use seemingly unsupervised, and any maintenance, if necessary, unscheduled. With this dismantling, a bright part of Norwich history was erased. While it's wonderful that King Arthur stepped in to sponsor the building of a new oven, I am unaware of any formal discussion about it. The new one, built under the careful direction of Richard Miskovich, may itself have specific operating procedures that will require oversight and education. I hope the mechanism is there to provide them. I respectfully suggest that the select board hone its gift policy so that it alone can accept or politely reject a gift, and that such decisions are reached only after careful deliberation about the pros and cons of each gift. I hope, if it is not there already, that the gift policy will be posted on the town's website. I would also like to suggest that a process be put in place to check at least annually the physical condition of gifts to the town, such as benches, bandstands, memorial markers, and yes, bake ovens, so that maintenance issues are caught and attended to. Ours is a good-hearted community. There is no reason why we cannot adequately care for the fabric that makes our community. Thank you for your consideration.
Yes. Yeah, all right. So yes, thank you, Nancy, and it'll be part of correspondence for the next packet. So thank you. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Suzanne Lupien, formerly of Norwich. I thought was wonderful, Nancy. Thank you so much. And I can't improve on what Nancy had to say, but I do want to just point out that, you know, what things signify is just so important. And the board and the town government, you are the protectors of the town. And I understand that there's a big turnover and people move in and move out and they don't really realize sometimes what they have. So I'm just waving at you and asking you to make that part of your jobs a little stronger so that, as Nancy said, the things that are still here, what comes to mind for me right off is the water fountain on the playground, the retaining wall to the cemetery on Beaver Meadow Road, that the things that the humans have done here are the things that really make the town significant. And I urge you to protect them. And you know, I'm going to talk to Nancy and Sarah Rooker about perhaps coming up with a little historic welcome to town booklet, something so that people might have a little chance at finding out things which will inevitably enhance their lives here. And we could go on forever. Some of the people who are in this room right now, George Fraser, Jim Harlow, you know, Minnie. So anyway, I'm really sad about the oven, and as Nancy said, there was no reason why it couldn't have been protected. I tried for years to get the town to board and to protect it against overuse, but that is water under the bridge. On we go. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? Let's see. Any online? Any select board comments?
I guess I'll comment. So I wrote a memo about the bread oven, and I'm just thinking that it takes some technical knowledge to operate the oven. That apparently needs sort of a low and slow firing to maintain its integrity. And it may be too much for transient population or people who just don't know, that I think they want to, you know, have a social time, maybe cook some pizzas or whatever. And it inadvertently gets fired too high. So just in terms of our gift policy, we might have to think in terms of who's around. Or if we have a special historic gift such, because I think the bread oven does have historic and cultural significance, then it needs special monitoring. And we'd have to figure out who that would be. So it's just something to think about as we are trying to review the gift policy. But it might we might unfortunately, if we can't figure that out, we might exclude some pretty special gifts too, just to be fair, so we don't destroy them. So that's my view on it.
Thank you, Mary. Marcia, I saw you unmuted yourself. Would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to echo. I think that's Mary's got a good point. I think that, you know, maybe what we want to consider is things that have this kind of historic and cultural value should maybe be under the purview of the Historic Commission and have a special appointment for that sort of thing. I think in general, we should recommit ourselves to good stewardship of the town. I think that goes without saying. And I like the idea about having a booklet in terms of a historical welcome. And I'd like to see that on our website as well, because I think it sort of sets an expectation for the town and for new people who come here. And as Roger knows, I've made some suggestions pursuant to Mary's suggestions for the gift policy, which would incorporate those historic and cultural considerations.
Thank you, Marcia. Any further board member comments? I mean, the only thing I would add is, yes, it's sort of, I think we're offering a lot of technical fixes, right, to sort of what folks have delivered very sort of poignant and pointed comments, right, that I think they were really sort of beautiful reflections. And we're providing technical fixes. I think our rec department similarly tried to provide a technical fix, right? And so what I will say is that, yes, having the ability to see the future in the present, right, is what we need to do. Is sort of, as Marcia said, what we need for our thinking behind our technical fixes, our gift policies, right? So we need to, yeah, recommit to the meaning and the intention that we just heard, as well as just the actual fixes on the ground, right? So, and yeah, seeing the future in the present when we write these things. So, so yes, appreciate that. Any other select board comments before we move on to the consent agenda? But thanks to everyone. Okay, so let's move on to the consent agenda. So when we, just as a reminder, when we approved the consent agenda, we received correspondence, we approved the AP warrants, and also finalized the meeting minutes for 7:14 and 7:16. And it has been our practice to make a motion with any pulled correspondence. So let me first ask, would anyone like to pull any of our correspondence at this time for discussion, or can we instead make a motion? Go ahead, Marcia.
I was just going to say, with reference to Pam Smith's question about the open meeting law, that might be addressed in your.
I tried, yeah.
Right. And we're going to discuss that, I hope.
If you would like to pull them, then please make a motion that reflects that, yeah.
Yes, I would like to pull both yours and Pam's as part of it. And also, I suppose the Mr. Torino question about Burton Woods, simply because I'm wondering when that's coming up. And so I'd like to discuss it.
So yes, effectively all correspondence, yes. Okay. Why don't we make a motion to pull the correspondence, and then we'll enter in discussion of that correspondence, and then we'll make a separate motion for the other consent agenda. How's that sound? Does that make sense? So can I get a motion for the correspondence?
I move to accept, to bring forward the correspondence of Pam Smith, Roger Arnold, and Jared Torino.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, made by Marcia, seconded by Mary. Okay, discussion. Would it be helpful if I sort of just quickly sort of talk about my response to Pam Smith's response? Is that okay? So we received a correspondence and inquiry that asked after the responsibility for the posting of meeting minutes and who's ultimately responsible for the statutory compliance for open meeting law. My answer was simply that it is the public body's responsibility for those meeting minutes, but because one of the designated posting places for that is on the website, it inherently involves some collaboration with town staff, right? And so there has been, I would say, a pattern of delivering meeting minutes agendas, but more significantly meeting minutes, sort of up to the deadline, right? Up to the final hours of the deadline, which is provides difficulties for staff's work. So in that, so I sought to acknowledge and answer a little bit of Pam Smith's question, which is the public body is responsible for the posting of meeting minutes, but they need to work with town staff to post on the website. We don't have the technical abilities to have multiple authors of that website at this time. And so I had suggested that on the third day after a meeting looks to be the deadline for giving these meetings, turning that over to Miranda. But I think like ultimately it would be great to sort of have board consensus that we continue to talk to town staff, right? Miranda, who does this work, had some good suggestions that are not incorporated into that memo. So that's that. Does that help?
Yeah. I guess to the extent that your memo was trying to, I think, be sort of a higher standard than the open meeting law itself, it's great, except that there's the problem is that we can't, as a board, make a rule that applies to other elected officials. And I can give you the site for that. It's Couture versus Selectmen of Berkshire. And so basically, if we had a rule that pertained to changing what was in the open meeting law statute, it could only apply to our board and those that we appoint. And so listers, for example, would be exempt from that.
Okay. So yes, thank you. And like, thank you for that clarification, Marcia. And I think like ultimately, if we were to look to enshrining this in more formal policy, we would have to take note of that. I think at this point, you know, I would be looking for sort of board approval or consensus that we continue to work on this problem and perhaps draft some kind of message to select board appointed committees, you know, to sort of solve this sort of bottleneck, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Mary, did you want to go ahead and make a point?
Yeah, I think I might have been the culprit with Pam Smith's correspondence.
You're not alone.
I'm not alone.
With the
And
problem.
we do try to be diligent. Do try to, you know, get correspondence or, you know, minutes to Miranda in a reasonable amount of time. Not usually for a Monday meeting, not Monday night, although sometimes I have done it Monday night to get it in. It's more complex than wait. But also the 5 days also means a weekend. That means Saturday and Sunday. Really the last day, if you have a Monday meeting, it should be posted Saturday. Well, who's here on Saturday? Okay, and who's watching? And yes, we do try to be diligent. We're going to mess up sometimes, but we're also going to all try to be really diligent. And there's a lot going on here. So I'm not suggesting we, you know, have to make a lot of rule changes. We'll just do the best we can. If we get called out on it, sure. I mean, I'll admit, tried to get it in on time. It didn't work, but boy, got to Miranda on Monday at like 9:01. She had it posted. So maybe people could relax a little bit. Just saying.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, Mary, you make the point that town staff does an exemplary job with last minute work.
Yes,
and I think
they
this
have a
is,
lot to juggle.
and I think this is to our role to better support, you know, to better support them, I think, in this case, because I think it is hard when you're getting something the morning of and saying like, please post this, otherwise we risk sort of a violation, right? So I think, what I would look for as I said in the correspondence, I would like sort of board consensus that I maybe work with town staff and then draft something for possible distribution to appointed for chairs, committee chairs. So I'm seeing some nods. Rob, I haven't seen your nod before. Okay. Yes, great. So Mary, I haven't seen your nod.
Yeah, no,
okay.
I like your
Great.
point of view. I'd
We're all
like
nodding.
actually to hear from Miranda, because I think the weekend, the fact that it's 5 days, not business days, also makes it awkward.
Yes, Miranda proposed a chart. So she had some ideas
Okay.
because yes, OML does not rest for the weekends or the
No, it
holidays.
doesn't. It's very strict.
Does not rest. But OML. Okay. Does that help, Marcia? Go ahead.
It does. In the process of that, the thing that I don't know is, which I thought would be helpful to people as well. It says in the open meeting law that you're supposed to post it to a website if one exists. And that refers to a town website, I believe. And in the case of a municipal public body, posted in or near the municipal office and in at least 2 other designated public places in the municipality. So I'm just wondering if we could specify where those are so that people would know where to look for them.
Yes, and we previously have, and I think Herb is going to drop us some knowledge now. Go ahead, Herb.
Usually that's
Record.
part of your rules of procedure, but it's the post office, the town clerk's office, the outside bulletin board outside Tracy Hall. Those are the 3 physical locations as a courtesy, and it's only a courtesy. It's not a required spot, but we do the Norwich listserv and what we call our worldwide email list, and then obviously the web page.
Okay. Go ahead,
Maybe
Marcia.
we could maybe post that on our website or something someplace so that this is where you find things.
Sure.
Yes, it is a little perverse if you see on the website to go look physically somewhere else when you could see it at the website. But yes, I understand.
Covering all bases, belts and suspenders.
Yes. Okay, so any further discussion on this, or can we move on to the other? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, let's see, am I coming through yet? I'd just like to point out that it isn't statute, but generally speaking, everybody makes best effort to get these things in a timely manner.
Right, and I think that's appreciated, but I just don't want necessarily town staff sort of like holding the 2 hours to deadline back, right? That's all. But yes, sorry. Okay. Is that it? I didn't mean to get the last word. Go ahead, Claudia.
No, I think I was just moving us on to Marcia's other
Please.
correspondence.
Yes, please go ahead.
The Trails Committee is drafting a proposal for the select board to review about changing the class 4 to a trail. It's still a work in progress at their level. And there are very strict statutory requirements that need to be followed to change that designation. And I believe to include public meetings, public hearings, if I'm not wrong.
Herb and Marcia are nodding.
Their last meeting minutes said that they were going to be working on it at their next meeting. So it's something that will probably come to the board in the fall.
So
Go
the
ahead,
only
Marcia.
thing, I just wanted to make sure that there would be ample notice for people.
There must be.
Don't worry,
And never
Marcia.
assume.
Yes, thank you for that, Claudette. That was actually really helpful. Does that, okay, so
Yep.
Now go ahead, Claudette.
I move to accept the correspondence.
Is there a second?
Second.
Marcia beat you, Rob. But all in favor, please raise your hand so I can clearly see. Okay, great, thank you.
And I move to accept the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, excellent, thank you. Yes, that was Okay, it was on time. Next, we have a Conservation Commission appointment. Board will be asked to make appointment. I believe someone, can we begin with the motion?
Yeah, that's it. I move to appoint Charlotte Takuba to the Conservation Commission as a youth representative.
Is there a second?
Second.
Claudette said it, so we'll say Claudette. Any further discussion, including if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak towards this applicant? Just checking. Okay, yeah.
Craig Lane, 782 Tigertown. I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. I'd like to speak in support of her appointment. She's been to a few meetings already and had really insightful comments and thoughtful questions. She's a young person, which is a great thing to have involved in a commission. We've had someone else from who was a high school student, who was a wonderful person to have with us, the perspective of young people and what's going on in their minds and what they're interested in. And their perspective of conservation has been really helpful. So Charlotte's another young person. We don't want just old grumpy people like me to be on the commission. We need young people. So I really support her appointment. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much, Greg. Any further select board comments or questions? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, so yes, please thank our applicant and now member. Okay, so next on our agenda is resolutions for currently serving active duty military personnel, and we're going to be authorizing 2 resolutions, right? But I think I think there's some folks in the audience who would maybe like to introduce sort of more about the folks we would look to be authorizing that resolution for. So perhaps we can begin with that. We have some families here. So and Herb, could you just sort of maybe can I hand to you to sort of make an introduction?
Right, so just, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Just making sure I haven't spoken yet. Okay. We have here tonight that's representing all of this. We're going to start with Commander Jim Harlow, who's the current commander, post commander for American Legion Post 9 in North. No, which number? 8. Sorry. 8. Sorry, my apologies.
It's in the same number.
I'm still used to Fairhaven, where it's double digits over there. So. But I would like to introduce Jim so that he can go around the room a little bit, introduce who's here, especially the family members, and there are some Legion members, especially for those folks that are online that can't fully see everybody just yet, but will shortly. Jim, if you could come up to the microphone. Yeah.
Oh man, better get up here. I'm used to yelling anyways. Anyway, for the record, I'm Jim Harlow, and I am the commander of Post 8. And we're honored to be here tonight for this resolution. And as veterans, we know it's hard on families when their loved ones are overseas serving. And it's just nice that the town of Norwich will do something like this. So with us tonight, I'm going to start behind here. And this is J.C. Cobb, who is Sergeant First Class Beckett's wife. And next to her is Miss Paisley Beckett. And for the record, we asked Paisley how old she was, and she made it very explicit. She is 4.5 years old as of today.
Oh, wait.
And,
Oh, that's today. No, today's not her birthday. No.
No,
No,
it's
okay.
4.
As of today, she's
4.5.
Okay. Oh, okay. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
see. Okay.
So can you see how she's good with numbers, I think.
Yes.
So anyway, we're very proud to have them here tonight. And next to them is Minnie Slater and Tom Slater. And they live in Beaver Meadow. And their son is Specialist 4th Class Tom Slater. And he is also serving overseas. And once again, we're very honored to have them here. And it is a hard thing. It is a hard thing on the families to have their loved ones gone for a year or more. And in this modern day, sometimes they get deployed 2 or 3 times. So, and behind them with all the hats are just veterans and legionnaires, and the man behind the camera is a legionnaire. And I think everybody knows Demo and Gary DeGosta and Bill, but Bill's a secret agent man. And then Jim McGuire and George Frazier. And should I say Richard Newgas? He's camera shot. And I will turn it over to you for the resolution, but in closing, I'd like to publicly thank Herb for kind of guiding us through this process. From all I can tell, this has never been done for any soldier in the town of Norwich who are overseas. There was a letter in World War II explaining what people were doing where they were, but it wasn't a resolution. It was just a letter written, and it's about 4 pages long. And Korea couldn't hear or find anything, and Vietnam absolutely not. And so it's very nice. We appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Herb. And basically, why don't you wave at the man over there? Because maybe Daddy will see that somewhere. We understand it's going to be on YouTube.
Right, so just so you'll know, the meeting is recorded. We can basically upload it and even send you a link to each of the families. So if you want to yourselves send it as some form of surprise or something, or even if they have the time that you can't connect with them, if they can get to YouTube, we can give you the link there and they can just, look at this in their own time. And we can also compartmentalize it so you don't get the meeting that you just listened to for 45 minutes. You can just get right to the point of where we're at now. So if you want the whole thing, we can do that, but we can also compartmentalize it.
Once again, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And so perhaps it's appropriate that I do my sort of best public speaking by reading the resolution, and then I'll take a motion. Is that good? How's that?
I believe there's 2 resolutions.
There are 2 resolutions, yes, and so I'm happy to read them. Yes, and we have these the resolution here that Herb has prepared for us. Thank you, Herb. And they don't yet have our signatures, but we will sign them and we will get them to you folks. So this one, I'll read them both. Be it resolved that the Norwich Select Board expresses its appreciation for Specialist Thomas Slater, a resident of the town of Norwich who is deployed overseas as a member of the Vermont Army National Guard. This resolution expresses appreciation for SPC Slater's willingness to serve the town of Norwich, the state of Vermont, and the United States of America through military service, show the dedication and commitment to leave family, full-time employment, and other community service through his deployment, sacrifice personal aspirations at an even greater level through his time of deployment, and devote time and energy in addition to family, work, and life needs in his military service. The town of Norwich is blessed to have a citizen like SPC Slater, who is willing to show the sacrifice and dedication needed for military service that requires so much time away from family, work, and community. And also be it resolved that the Norwich Select Board expresses its appreciation for Sergeant First Class Robert Beckett, a resident of the town of Norwich who is deployed overseas as a member of the Vermont Army National Guard. This resolution expresses appreciation for SFC Beckett's willingness to serve the town of Norwich, the state of Vermont, and the United States of America through military service, show the dedication and commitment to leave family, full-time employment, and other community service through his deployment, sacrifice personal aspirations at an even greater level through his time of deployment, and devote time and energy in addition to family, work, and life needs in his military service. And again, the town of Norwich is blessed to have a citizen like SFC Beckett who is willing to show the sacrifice and dedication needed for military service that requires so much time away from family, work, and community. And both of these are resolved on July 28th, 2021. Okay. And then how about I take a board motion and then I'll invite any further discussion. Go ahead, Claudette.
As a veteran, I am happy to approve, to move to approve the resolutions included in the Select Board packet expressing appreciation for active duty military service members Robert Beckett, and Thomas Slater.
A second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any further discussion or any other comments? Or any public comments? I see some folks. Go ahead, Linda Cook.
Thank you. Sergeant First Class Robert Beckett. Specialist Thomas Slater. I am proud of both of you for your service, both abroad and here with your families. I wish you all well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. And yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. And any further, if there's no further board comments, we'll vote, right? Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead, Marcia. Oh, you're on mute though. You're on mute. We missed it. Yes.
Sorry. May we sign them in blue ink rather than electronically?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
yes, we will. Yes, Herb has taken that into account so that we'll see our real signatures. Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone for their service and for being here. And thank you to Herb for his work. And yeah, anything further?
No, just mostly the Legion for
And the Legion.
holding me up to get this to go forward for you folks. It really wasn't me. It's those guys that
Okay.
did it.
And we admit we're not the easiest to work with.
That's for sure, especially the big asset.
We agree, we agree.
Well,
And thank you, town of Norwich.
yes, yes,
Thank
and we'll
you for your
and yes,
service.
thank you to you and your families, and we'll get these to you with appreciation. Okay, and you're welcome to hear an interim report from the Child Care Committee, but if you're looking to leave, that's okay too. Okay, so we have some folks sort of leaving the room. I see that Rebecca Holcomb, who's the chair of the Child Care Committee, is with us to sort of do a brief presentation sort of on the highlights of a longer interim report. And so we'll hear that, and then we'll take any board questions and discussion after that, and hopefully give them some good feedback to continue their work. So yes, sorry, we're closing, hearing some hustle and bustle because it's a true hybrid meeting. Okay, so yes, so go ahead. Rebecca, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. And I won't take it personally that everybody left, but I'll just express my gratitude to anyone who's left in the room for their service, and also appreciate that. And I'm glad the board recognized them today. Roger, I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen. Do I have that permission?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to do that right now. Oops. Let's see. Nope, don't want to do that. So are you able to see this?
We're not seeing anything now.
Okay, I'm presenting. I'm trying to, let me go back and try again. I'm trying to figure out how to bring this up. Have you given me the ability to present?
I've allowed multiple people to share the screen, which is usually how I do it.
Mhm. Last time I just presented and it let me share. Let me see. Hold on a second. Oh, wait, I know what it is. I forgot to do this. I always forget this. Okay. Here we go.
There you go.
Now you go. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Oops, did I get the wrong one? Are you seeing the, what?
We're sort of seeing only the top of your window. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to present, and now you should see the whole screen. Is that right? interim
Yes,
report?
I do.
Perfect. With my little niece, Veronica. I thought we'd have to have a topical child in the picture. Wanted to thank you all so much for giving us the chance to do this. And I'm here presenting tonight, but I want to thank Mary, who has gone above and beyond to keep us organized, but also our committee. We meet at 8 o'clock at night because we have several parents on the committee who need to put their children to bed before they come and do this work. And I'm so grateful to them for bringing their professional skill to try to make a good presentation for you as well. So the first thing I wanted to do was to tell you and encourage you to take time to read on pages 3 and 4 of the interim report. Those are the key findings, and we worked hard to pull those out so that if you were in a rush, you could quickly find the key findings. And I'll refer to some of them today as we speak, but those are also there. If you have questions about those, that's a good place to begin the conversation when we get there. As you may have known, when we came back and presented, I think it was back in February, we outlined a body of work, including what we would do before this current report. And the first of the items that we committed to doing was conducting a survey of current parents in Norwich with children under the age of 5. And we worked hard to get this out through a variety of methods. Thank you to the town and the school district in particular, but also to folks on the listserv and other places who contributed to this. And we did have 62 parents of a total of 82 children under age 5 respond, which given the size of our community is actually a pretty significant response rate. We felt good about that. And the overwhelming concern, and you have picked this up if you read the report, was that there is a lack of available slots at childcare centers, but that we need to be very specific when we talk about lack of affordable care. We hear a lot about how there isn't enough childcare in Vermont generally, but also in Norwich. And what we found when we looked at care is that there were particular shortages in certain areas, particularly with respect to infants and toddlers, who are the youngest children, and that also the price of care was quite significant. And so 68% of parents said they couldn't find the slots that they hoped for, and that also the cost was very, very high. And that had impacts on some of their other decisions. So 3/4 of the respondents in this survey said that to make their childcare arrangements work, one or more parents had to stop working altogether, or that one of them had decreased the amount of time that they could spend devoted to work. And obviously that has implications for family income, for other aspects of life, and also for tax receipts in the state. So that's a pretty significant finding. The other significant finding was that over 1/3 said that they'd cut back on spending for other life actions, whether it was food, healthcare essentials, savings, long-term financial stability, or housing. So that clearly parents were having to make financial choices to prioritize childcare. And so that was one of the most significant findings that we found. The other finding, the lack, was around full day slots. Many parents noted that there was care sometimes available, but that it didn't cover the full workday, so that if you were a parent, it was very difficult to access. The other item that we committed to do, it's not advancing, oops, there's a delay here, was to survey providers. And we did an initial preliminary survey verbally over the phone. So these were phone interviews conducted by people on the committee initially. And then based on that input, developed a more robust survey that we could send to providers in the area. Those surveys are still coming in. So this is a preliminary survey, but because we chose to conduct our verbal or oral interviews with people in what we call the 4-town area, Hartford, Lebanon, Hanover, Norwich, we actually think we picked up the providers that serve most of the Norwich children. And in fact, some of the providers who are responding currently are providing us with a lot of incredible and rich textured information, but they're also telling us that they have no Norwich families enrolled. And from the private childcares and the childcares generally, and our survey included the Marion Cross School, which is why I'm referring to private childcare separately. What we heard pretty consistently was that there is an acute shortage of staff. In fact, programs did not talk about competing for children. They did talk about competing with other programs for staffing, and that the shortage of staffing was limiting the amount of slots they were offering, and in some cases even driving proposed reductions in slots and availability of childcare, particularly for the youngest children again. And that's because if you can't hire someone, obviously with the right qualifications, it's difficult to staff sufficiently to operate a toddler or an infant room. We heard that from all the private childcares. The only two programs that didn't mention that were the two school programs. That's the Marion Cross School and the Immersion Montessori program in Lebanon, both of which pay, obviously the teachers at the Marion Cross School are on the teacher salary schedule, and the Immersion Montessori is paying over $20, $21 an hour. So they're paying a lot more, but they don't perceive that they have the same staffing challenges. These providers echoed what parents said about acute unmet demand for care for the youngest children. In fact, I think there were 11 slots for infants in Norwich, and 6 of them were in a program for a program that doesn't serve any children from Norwich. So there are very, very few slots available for these youngest children. There was unmet demand also for the full day pre-K slots at the Marion Cross School. The wait list is actually longer than the number of slots that they're able to provide, but that for many of the other preschool age programs, many programs indicated that they were able to resolve wait lists by the start of the school year. So it didn't seem like there was an acute shortage of pre-K slots. So again, when we talk about shortage of care, we have to be very specific about the age of the child that we're talking about, and also the length of day. It was the full day slots, not the part day slots. So those were some of the key findings there. With respect to cost, which is something certainly that echoes the report that we made in February around the cost of care, we found that there was significant variability of cost across programs, but that overall it was expensive. And in fact, if you're in a childcare, that one of the employer affiliated childcares, if you have a child who's 0 to 3, you could spend up to $2,100 a month, or about $25,000 a year to get care for an infant. And then for the older care, the range was free, because effectively pre-K, the full day pre-K program at the Marion Cross School is free, to up to $1,700 a month for a child who's getting full day care in that same provider, or just over $20,000 a year. And there was some evidence in the data that there's pretty significant, some of the programs seem to serve more disadvantaged populations than others, and that may be partly an artifact of the fact that some of them are employer-based or related, and some of them have specialized services. It's worth noting when you look at these rates that we quoted here, that some of the programs that we cited actually have increased their rates since we did this survey. So these are actually low compared to what some programs are currently offering. Both parents and providers, this was an unexpected finding, but both parents and providers talked about a need for paid family leave or something like that. And this was a problem that both said was made more acute during the pandemic. If a family has to quarantine because someone's been exposed, and sometimes repeatedly, parents and families really, and actually providers as well, because they had the same problem, really struggled when children were sick or schools and programs were closed and parents still needed care. And that this caused many families to really fear losing work or losing wages, and really struggle to take care of their children during the pandemic without some kind of safety net in the form of paid family leave. We also looked at tax credits and related, there are also the savings plans, other benefits that people have mentioned, and thank you to her for forwarding me some of that information. And we also consulted some academic researchers at American University who've done a lot of research around the effect of tax credits, but also employer subsidies for family savings accounts that allow people to pay for childcare. And, some of the challenges in this landscape is we don't know fully what the tax credit landscape will be. It does tend to benefit working parents. The current American Rescue Plan tax credits are a huge benefit to many families with young children now. As of now, they're not projected to continue. We don't know whether that will be, but there's also evidence that tax credits can help family finances, but they tend not to shape family childcare, in part because they tend to come too late and they tend to be too unpredictable. So again, while they are pegged as a support for families around childcare, the research supports the relief on family financial situations, but it doesn't support yet that this kind of demand side portable credits or subsidies actually impact supply. So if there's a story coming out of these findings from interviewing providers, looking at the benefits and the research, it's that we have a pretty critical challenge around supply, but the tools that we're currently using aren't really addressing supply. And that's why this problem has proved so intractable. We did also have a section, and I encourage you to read it. And we are committed to updating you because both of the pending legislative initiatives that we cited in our interim report have task forces associated with them that are working through the summer to come back with proposed legislation in the fall. And we will come back to you with updates on the work on these two initiatives. The first is that the legislature did substantially propose new investments in Cfap, the child credits for and the assistance for families who are working, who tend to be lower wage families. And they propose to extend the band of eligibility to families who are earning up to about 350% of the federal poverty line. That's lower than many of the families in Norwich, if you look at the data that's already available on household income in Norwich, but it could benefit some families who are eligible. However, there is not yet a financing mechanism for this, and that is what presumably the committee will come back for. The other thing they did do is they invested in supporting tuition support and loan forgiveness for childcare providers. And childcare providers have significant education requirements to run their businesses, but they are not compensated well. And the hope was that by taking on some of the burden of the education costs associated with serving in that capacity, it would make it easier for people to enter the profession. I think we also have to be realistic about the fact that it may make it easier to enter, but this isn't going to task or touch the challenge of low pay, which we do know from our providers has made it difficult to attract and retain staff. In fact, we have more people certified to serve as early childhood educators in the state than there are positions. Many of them choose to move into school systems because they're better compensated there. And that is something that we heard. The other issue that we want on your radar, it's not directly related to childcare, but it does have a potential impact, and it's unclear exactly what, is that there was a study done several years ago that looked at the extent to which the education funding formula adequately provides or supports communities that serve a disproportionate number of families that are economically disadvantaged or learning English, or maybe who live in very rural areas where they don't have the scale to afford some of the kinds of programs that we in Norwich are so lucky to benefit from. And what they're looking at is modifying the education funding formula to increase the tax capacity of those communities. And the probability is that that will have an impact on the tax rate here in Norwich. And what we did share was the preliminary modeling done by JFO. And as you know, if you've been watching the legislature, what goes into the sausage machine isn't always what comes out the other end. But so we don't know. We can't tell you now what it looks like. But I do think it's realistic to expect that this will have an upward impact on the Norwich education tax rate. The current modeling suggests it could be up to 50 cents. Again, part of what they're compensating for is the cost of social services that more disadvantaged and students, communities have to bear. There are many ways to address that need. We don't know how the legislature is going to choose to address it, but the committee felt strongly that we had a responsibility to put this on your radar because it would affect your planning and how you think about some of these issues. Enduring challenges, just to summarize, we are going to have to figure out as a community and as a state and truly as a nation as well, how to address the fact that there's not enough qualified early educators who are willing to work in the private providers in particular. The state is helping, but in the long term, this doesn't seem to address the issue of compensation. We see that the costs of care are high, and they're also increasing much faster than inflation, despite significant new state investments. And in the report, you saw that there was data that at the 75th percentile of income, the rates had increased 20 to 26% between 2015 and 2019. And again, this year, we'd already heard from a parent who called in and said her rates gone up 20% in 1 year. So that is an enduring issue we're going to have to cope with. There's also some evidence that our current system of portable vouchers may not be targeted enough to ensure that care is being created in the places where it's needed, particularly the youngest children and the toddlers, and that it may not be providing providers with the predictability of revenue they need to make business decisions about expanding supply. And we heard this from providers who talked about the variability in the rates, particularly in the small providers, if your enrollment fluctuates by just 1 or 2 kids in a year. And we also see this in providers saying that it's much easier to provide care for the preschool age children. And there are providers who only serve preschool age children, and the entire cost of care is covered by the state subsidy. And they don't have waiting lists because that's not the product that parents in Norwich seem to be really interested in. So there's some issues around there. And the committee is committed to going through some of the research we have received from our contacts at American University and doing more work to look at initiatives that are taking place nationally and in other municipalities around using contracting as a process, contracting and grants as a process to direct investments so that you can provide more stability and support development of supply where it's needed. And then the final issue that we'll have to grapple with is that there is state policy instability, and that does make local planning more challenging. So as we get information from the legislature, we hope to be able to put that into a report that we can give to you in the fall, and you can use to inform your future conversations here. So as we, by way of closing, I'd like to make sure that we just review what we've already committed to you in February, in our February report to do, but also to take time to hear from you. What have we missed? What do we need to look at? What in this list should we take off if you don't want it? And what is it you'd really like to have in hand that we haven't addressed by our time in December? We've committed to working with Bree, and we're very grateful to her, but we need to do a much more robust review of the municipal programs that already exist. And that also includes the library, which it plays an important role. We're still receiving surveys from providers, and we'll make sure that information is used for you. We'll update you on what we've learned about the most recent policy developments and what they can speak to and what they can tell us about how to effectively address some of our challenges. We also committed to doing some case studies of various approaches that Vermont municipalities have taken. And there are some very interesting models around the state that we can show you just to tell you how other municipalities are thinking about this. And we've also received some good communication, too late to incorporate in this report, around historical and informal solutions that Norwich families have taken. And we look forward to following up on those and including them in a subsequent report. So I'd be happy to stop there. I do see there's one question that I can address in the chats, or we can take it as you wish, but I'll turn it back to you, Roger, to direct.
Yes, thank you. So yes, thank you for the public comment in the chat, which I will read as a public comment after board members have an opportunity to ask questions. So Becca, can I ask that you maybe stop the screen share for the moment? Is that possible?
Absolutely.
And then just so we can see faces. Yeah, excellent. So maybe we'll take board member questions and comments first. And thanks to that report. Go ahead, Marcia.
My comment really is, this is a nationwide problem. The state hasn't figured it out. Nobody's figured it out. But there's loads of people who have successfully historically navigated this. And so I think that Mary's memo and number 5 of the next steps is really the focus that I would like to see picked up, because I don't see this as, one solution problem. And childcare is something that I think is unique to every family. One size doesn't fit all, and all options, if they even exist, from state or national help or even town help, aren't going to satisfy everybody. So I'd like to see not just, like one solution, but a lot of solutions. And I would like to see a lot more input from people who have successfully raised children without any of those helps. When we came here 25 years ago with a 3-year-old and I don't know what he was, 7-year-old, it was tough, but you put it together, and I think that kind of experience that loads of us have can be helpful. So I think you've done good work so far, but I think that's a really big missing component.
Thank you. And I think we will. And I think Anne-Marie Smith had written a memo with some suggestions of things to look up, and we'll absolutely look up in that. I think we had committed to surveying the current situation. And I think that we can learn from the past, but I also feel that now we know a little bit more about where Norwich is currently. I think it's easier to go back, and we will absolutely make that commitment to reach out and do some broader conversations. I do have to say there are some things that are different, and I too raised children and had some different kinds of struggles. And I had a child at one point who was sick, and I stayed home because that's what made sense for us for a while. But I also am mindful of the fact that there are some challenges on young families having children today that I did not face even just a couple of years ago. And there are a couple factors converging that make it a slightly different situation. It doesn't mean that we can't learn from some of those other options, and there are plenty of things we can learn. It just means that we need to think about how to bring them forward in a way that's appropriate to our current context. And I hear you, and Marcia, I will actually just pick up, because I think you mentioned the national landscape. There are some of these issues that truly may have to be addressed at the state level, but I also feel that in some of our conversations, and we're reaching out to people who are working on childcare regionally, we can also play a role in helping people understand what it is about state policy that may actually not be serving communities as well as it might be. So I think there's that role too. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. We've got a couple more months, so we're going to wring every minute out of that to try to do what we can. But thank you for your feedback. It's an important point.
Rob, did I see that you unmuted yourself for a question or comment?
Nope, just unmuted myself.
Okay. That's okay. Cool. Oh, hey. Go ahead, Mary.
I just think the most frustrating part of studying this problem is just to know that the early childhood educators can't get a decent wage. And I don't know what Norwich could do about that unless we have a letter writing campaign, or I don't even know how to talk to you about that. But to put that investment into education and to be, knowing exactly the right way to educate a young child and have it be safe, have it be appropriate. I mean, that's priceless. There's so much going on developmentally at a young age. It just is very discouraging to me, and I'd love to know what we all could do to change that. So a statement, an article, I don't know, select board letter to the editor, plea for help. I don't know. I don't think there's anything really obvious, but I find it very frustrating.
Thank you, Mary. So I have a question, actually, if that's okay. I was curious about this sort of the conversation around contracting as a possible solution, and to understand how contracting as a policy decision works or doesn't on a municipal level, right? So, and just to be clear, the way that contracting would work is rather than sort of having a reoccurring or one-time sort of injection of like a subsidy, this would be about, sort of a prospective payment or a long-term agreement with a funding source and a provider. Is that sort of what we mean by contracting? Is just, and then who is typically the funder? Is it a state actor? Is it a grant? Could it be a municipality? And what does that look like in terms of the supply question? So I guess if you could just maybe speak a little bit more about like what you help to investigate with contracting as sort of.
Right. So I think we have a lot of work to do, because I think there are lots of ways that contracting could take place. So for example, there is a school district that had some extra space in its building, and they set up a contract with a local childcare provider. And basically they provide the building, which has to be plowed and heated and everything else. And they push in the pre-K, and the childcare provider provides full day care for 0 to 5-year-olds on that site. because they didn't have to deal with the overhead, they were able to raise the wages of all their staff, and it provides for members of the community. That was the commitment back. The district saying, we're giving you this community resource. We want you to use it for our community. So they set up a contract that spelled that out. That's one example that could happen at the municipal level. It could be contracting with, and I think you already do something similar where you've given some money to the Norwich Child Care Center to do an after-school program at various points. It could be saying, we're going to give you this sum of money, and it can only be used on Norwich students in this context. The challenge that we have in Norwich is that we have a lot of wonderful childcares in Norwich. In Norwich, only 28% of the slots are for Norwich children, just to be realistic. So it's our providers serve the larger area. And you get into an issue there where people want to know if they're paying for it, that it's going to actually help someone from their town. So that's why you had to have a contracting relationship. Other states, Vermont has leaned into portable vouchers, and there's some advantages to that because it allows people to take the child care voucher to wherever their child enrolls. But what we do tend to see is that you can have a situation where if a provider only serves, for example, 3 to 5 year olds, they might take the Act 166 funded children, but we have a child care provider here who mentioned to us that they're one of the only ones that provides infant slots. And as they've lost the pre-K students to the other programs, they're no longer able to provide those infant slots because their business model depends on having older children to cross-subsidize and cover some of the overhead costs. If you were contracting, you could say, we would provide you with this stable number of kids so that as a business, you could count on having 10 kids and you could invest in infant slots because you know you'd have stable revenues. Those are some of the examples that the partners from American were talking about, just to give you a sense of how contracting works. It's actually, frankly, how we used to do it at a much smaller scale as the school district with local providers. So, again, what it looks like and how it works with Norwich is a function both of who's paying and, obviously if it's a state subsidy, there's no role for the municipality to have any say in that. That's a state decision. It is an issue with local investment. So, again, we're not telling you what to do. What we can do is lay out a variety of strategies that communities have used to try to target the investment so that the investment is creating more value for the dollar spent. And does that answer your question? And we'll give you a much more robust explanation later.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in terms of providing more of a sort of descriptive language around what sort of contracting means, right? So I think that was helpful. And then I have one other question, but Mary also has her hand up. So go ahead, Mary.
I think as a committee, we've been trying to really try to stick to research and really trying to stick to the 0 to age 5 population. We want to broaden that, but also I sort of am feeling the need and wondering if other board members would agree to maybe look at case studies, play around with scenarios, think about what could actually be done in Norwich. So I'd like to know from other board members if they feel that's appropriate with the charge that we've given this committee.
Thank you, Mary. So let's circle back to that question because I think that's a good one for sure. But I want to make sure that other board members, if they don't have any other questions or comments before we get back.
And I just want to be clear that people understand that the last item on the next work, the issue that Marcia brought up would be part of this as well. I mean, there are ways that the municipality might convene some of those other options as well.
Go ahead, Rob.
I'm personally very appreciative of the quality of the surveys and the information, the data that's been collected. And I was, disheartened because it's such an intractable problem. We have to be very creative if we're going to be able to figure out something that will make it more feasible to have quality care for our kids.
Yes, it's a problem, but it's also a public good, right? So if we start seeing this as sort of a board who is looking to provide some if not just research, some possible solutions for a public good, or at least that's how I see it, then we might take on some enthusiasm potentially. So to that end, my other question is, I know that one of the, I think perhaps it's just maybe to sort of persuade some folks that it is a public good, or at least maybe it's an economic consideration, economic development consideration. They talk about sort of the issues for attracting sort of diverse hires to the region, right? Sort of as a burden for hiring sort of the needs that hiring people for the region, right? And so one of the things they talk about is like a cooperative model for their employees, right? And what would that look like? And I think obviously we don't necessarily have tons of employees to like offer that as sort of a benefit, but is this a case where we need to join in sort of the 4 core towns or other communities to think about what a cooperative model is for either employees or, so what are the other, we're talking about it as a sort of a familial problem or public good, or, are there other areas like economic development where childcare is discussed, and sort of, are there different things like cooperatives that are used to sort of solve these different ways of thinking about it? I don't know if that makes sense. That was sort of a convoluted.
Well, there was a lot there.
Yeah. But
I think there's a lot of issues. In fact, some of the childcares that we interviewed have cooperative models and have been historically cooperatives. One of the challenges that they're seeing, and I don't think this was in the report, but is that as more and more families have to be 2 working parents to afford to live here, parents are struggling more to do the cooperative side of the cooperative. And so there's been less involvement. So they're looking at new ways to work with parents and meet some of those needs as well.
Yeah.
And I think it is true that, one of the issues that came up, which wasn't part of our survey, but people kept mentioning, was housing, that's a real barrier, frankly, to recruiting staff, because they frankly can't afford the real estate given the wages that they're earning. And it was also came up in the context of parents saying in response to the survey, how can the state expect to have people live here if they can't afford to live here and can't afford to take care of their kids here? And so that did come up. And so that is one piece of it. In terms of cooperative partnerships, I think there are opportunities to work with other municipalities around some of these issues. One of the challenges is that there is a very different legislative landscape in Vermont and in New Hampshire. So for example, we provide vouchers for pre-K that are portable within Vermont, but not portable to New Hampshire. So that, that creates a financial incentive for our 3 and 5-year-olds to 5-year-olds to be on this side of the river for obvious reasons. It's a significant chunk of money. So there are opportunities there, and there are also some challenges that would have to be worked through. And obviously the subsidy programs for childcare assistance, those are different in different states. We have a different way of distributing those resources than New Hampshire, so you have to sort of work through those 2 things. And there was one other thing you said that was related, and I'm sure it will come. Oh, you kept talking about it as a public good. I think one of the challenges of Vermont is that actually we have universal pre-K subsidies for pre-K students, but it is delivered through a market, and markets they function differently than, say, a public school system. So you have to manage it. You have to manage it differently. So when you're doing a cooperative, the town of Norwich doesn't actually manage any childcare. It does have private childcares in town who serve Norwich children. It's not as clear what the role of the municipality is in supporting those partnerships, since those are really private nonprofit enterprises. It's not quite the same as if it was your own school district. So those are some of the issues that are going to come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So as the chat reminds me, we are running over time. So why don't we let's take some public comments. And then we'll sort of get back to Mary's question about the committee charge and the value or not of talking in a specificity of sort of case studies rather than solely research, or what kind of combination of that we would like, if I'm paraphrasing that correctly. Right?
Yep.
Okay, so are there any public comments? And so for folks who are participating via the Zoom, you can just raise your hand button on the bottom. Otherwise, I assume that this is a public comment, so I'll just read it from the chat. Doug Wilberdine asks, so is this an ask for Norwich to pay for childcare and or subsidized childcare, or is this just a general study? And they comment that it feels like there is an ask to Norwich taxpayers to pay for childcare. And then they also ask, can we just cut through that ask? And questions whether or not we're talking around making such an ask. I think Rebecca, I think I'm going to ask you to address this because you specifically at the start of the committee's work talked about sort of audited the charge and talked about what was sort of in your wheelhouse versus what you felt wasn't, or what the committee felt wasn't. So could you sort of maybe speak to some of that a little bit, or just sort of remind us of what you've previously said publicly?
Right. I think we're very clear that it is not our job to make recommendations, and we took very seriously the responsibility for researching what we could about current supply of childcare, current demand for childcare, and what various options are, and learning from providers who serve Norwich children, learning from parents in Norwich who have children. So what we are trying to do is provide you with information as well as information on best available research. We actually feel it's your job to figure out what to do with that. You are the elected representatives of the town. I am not, and I don't think anyone in the committee feels that it's really our place to do that. You have a broader perspective. You weigh this choice and this issue against the many, many other important issues that come before you in a way that we really can't. So our goal is to give you as much sound information and a set of examples that cannot all be done deliberately so that you can see what your options are, really is a way of helping you evaluate the trade-offs of different options, including doing nothing. And so it really is just to support the select board and make sure the select board is as informed as it can be. I can't cut through the ask because there is no ask at this point. And certainly that's not something we see as our task.
Thanks. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that clarity. So how about we just sort of get back to Mary's question about to what extent should sort of case studies or municipal examples be dived into more specifically in the next report. Do board members have any feelings about that next time, at this time, or would they like to think about it and sort of send word to the committee? So that's sort of the last question for this agenda item. And then I see Bree Swenson also has her hand up. And so we'll take her comment. Go ahead, Marcia.
Sort of just more free form thinking here. I sort of see this 0 to 5 age group as dividing into two parts, 0 to 3 and 3 to 5. Just developmentally and educationally, I think. And it seems to me that those two groups need different sorts of attention. For my own family, I can tell you it was difficult to find childcare because we had 2 full-time people with more than full-time jobs. And it was difficult to find what we needed for under 3, but we did it. And that's sort of the case study thing. But then 3 to 5, our answer was Montessori. And I really believe in that sort of early educational opportunity wholeheartedly. And it was discouraging to me when I was investigating options for after school care and things. We used the Pitt Connors service, and I was disheartened that there was a persona non grata sort of impression that group was not welcome at the school. And it seems to me that one of the first things we should be looking at is how to incorporate a school system which is about education. And if there was any way that we could do something with a 3 to 5 sort of program, I think that would go a long ways toward helping problems in terms of childcare. And the other sort of thing that I would just throw out there is it's great to think, I think, about collaborations with other towns. But I can tell you, as a person who was, working way over 40 hours a week, if you have a sick child and you need to get out of work and get them, driving to a different town is maybe not even possible. And your spouse is across the world or across the country doing something. You need to have lots of connections, and probably you want to have something as close to your locus as possible. So just some ideas.
Yeah, and that, Marcia, was echoed by families who, and some of the childcare choices people made reflected where families were. I don't know the full history on the after school program. I do know that the legislation around childcare regulations did change. And one of the things that is different from what used to be a couple of years ago is that school-based programs that provide childcare and charge for it have to be regulated as childcare as well. And now that did not used to be the case. And I do know that many school-based programs stopped providing those programs when that change was made. The school is registered as a child care to serve the 3 to 5 year olds right now. And so we do have a very robust program for 3 to 5 year olds. It's a full day program. And again, the waiting list for that is longer than the number of kids it's allowed to serve right now. So that is obviously a successful program that does have an educational mission. And some of the child cares in the Norwich nursery school or child care center of Norwich, is looking at a Montessori model or a Reggio Emilia model. And then there is the immersion Montessori. So there are a number of people playing with that model already in the area. We will look at these and we will try to give you a more robust perspective on what some of these other options are and what some of those other regulatory barriers have been historically and how that's played out in the current situation, just to help this committee again understand where the opportunities are that could be harvested for Norwich families.
Thank you.
Very good points, though.
Any other further comments? Go ahead, Claudette, please.
Just to answer Mary's question, I don't think I have enough information yet to be able to tell you if I think that this group should delve into specific options.
What kind of information would you need?
Just more info. I've never had to deal with childcare issues. I would be interested in reading what other communities have done, Vermont communities especially, before I could say, yeah, go investigate this option a little bit more. I need more info.
Claudette, would you find case studies to be informative? Because that was my feeling, was to they might be. I thought they might give you some insight on what to do or not to do.
I don't know, because maybe case studies based on, have a case study on a low-income family, on a single parent family, and then a case study on somebody who's in the geographic mean or economic mean for the state or for the county, and then someone who's in the higher pay scale area.
Yeah.
Maybe one of each would be helpful, because they're someone on a single parent with limited mobility, maybe doesn't have a car. It's going to be a whole lot more difficult for them.
I was thinking case studies that had economic solutions, like being able to find the space or a reduced amount that lets you raise the salary. That was one of the examples that Rebecca had. Just things like that. But, we don't want to, I think we need to get a little bit more towards how could we actually do something about this in Norwich. So
I think what I'm hearing, and maybe I just want to check that I'm hearing what you're asking. I think what I hear you saying is that there may be some families may be feeling challenged more acutely than others, and that we need to understand those families to make sure that we're giving every kid a fair chance. And that there are families that, talked to someone who lost their partner, and that's a challenge. I mean, all of a sudden they have to deal with everything that they used to have help with, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work. That's a different situation than a family with 2-parent income able to afford care at the Dartmouth Child Care Center, for example. So looking at some of those differences, I think, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Maybe let me think about that and look at we do have some survey data from the parents. This is actually this is actually a community that is one of the wealthier communities in the state, which means that we are going to have individual stories. But what we do have is the ability, because parents indicated on the surveys roughly where their income fell, we are going to be able to pull out how parents at different income levels responded and maybe give you some more nuanced detail. And I think that would speak to some of the challenges. I just want to be clear, there may not be too many people in some of those income groups, but we can certainly try to break that data and look at it that way. And that is something that that one of our committee members in particular is interested to do. So that it's a good question, and we will do our best to address that.
I think without sort of providing sort of an aggressive amount of supervision, I think we're sort of in that, I'm getting a sense that we would benefit from hearing sort of the committee reflect back on what we're sort of, reflect back on this meeting, and sort of, it might make sense if we sort of maybe reflect on this meeting, take up our own notes, and then sort of compare them sort of, you know, before we embark further, just so we can have more opportunities for communication. We can schedule an agenda item as a check-in sort of before that report, just so that we are getting what it is that we need. So I think that's just key, maybe.
We're also meeting with some other people who are very involved in childcare issues regionally, and we should be able to pull from some of that information. Some of the speaks to the questions that were just raised.
So I'm going to take a public comment from Bree Swenson, and then I'll sort of ask for other public comments, and then we do need to move on.
Yeah. So first, Claudette, thank you for addressing socioeconomic diversity, because that is a thing in Norwich. It is here. And just because your income is high doesn't mean that your cost of living is not so very high. We're a family that actually has had some challenges with that, with childcare. So I did notice in the report from the Child Care Committee that I was mentioned as a municipal option. I just wanted to let people know who were watching this that we are not 0 to 5 in Norwich Recreation. We are 5 and up. We're, you know, K through 6, and actually right now K through 8 because of summer camps, fully immersed in addressing the child care cliff that families find themselves dropping off as soon as you realize that, yes, you have childcare, and then you get to kindergarten and there's a 3 o'clock pickup, or there's a 2 o'clock pickup, or there's a vacation, and that's what we address. So I just want to make that very clear. That's all.
Thank you, Bree. And I am so grateful to you. And we talked to Bree, and we realized that the surveys that we did were very focused on 0 to 5, and it didn't adequately address the reality that, you know, the state considers early childhood up through age 8, and there's a reason, you know, we did not want to rush it because we felt it deserved a much more robust review. And so that's really one of the things we're talking about. The next meeting is how to pick up and follow up on that piece of work with you. Bree, you mentioned something else that is part of why I'm hesitating in the response to Claudette, which is that there is a childcare cliff, and there is actually a point in the income distribution where if you work more, you actually are more penalized financially. And so the reason I'm struggling is it's not a clear line, and you are actually really penalized at some point beyond that. And that is shifting because of the shift in the state data, and it's shifting because of some of other things as well. And so we are going to be able to disaggregate a little bit, but it's going to be a little bit messy because of the childcare cliff. And what we can do is show you where the cliff is and where we expect it to be hitting parents, but the data will be a little bit messy because parents are reporting after the fact, if that makes sense. But there's no question that you know, there are parents who are single parents who are working with quite modest incomes and extraordinary household costs, which is why one of the parents in the survey actually said it would do more to help childcare if you just dealt with the housing crisis. Some people, because that's their biggest ticket item. So there are families in Norwich who are really struggling to hold on here, and we want to be very careful about that as well.
Okay, thank you, Bree.
Yep.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I think we should move on if that's okay.
Thank you so much.
And just
Thanks,
send
Yeah.
thanks, and that I think the board, we should maybe just schedule a brief follow-up at our next meeting to sort of endorse or affirm sort of that last slide that the Child Care Committee had about their next steps, and to sort of clarify any questions that we had for them. I think that's what we'll do.
And at any time, you know how to find us, and we will. I mean, the input. I'm very grateful to Linda, who's come to several of our meetings. It's very helpful to have the input, and feel free to send us an email, speak to Mary, give us suggestions, recommendations, or requests. We welcome them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks everyone for that. I appreciate going over time to finish up the discussion. Let's move on to our next item on the agenda. They're readopting the Town of Norwich fee schedule. Let's begin with a motion, and then we'll go from there.
I move to adopt the Norwich, Vermont fiscal year 2021-22 fee schedule dated 7/14/2021 and included in the meeting packet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? So would we like to hear a little bit summary from Herb, or would we, or would folks like to have let's hear from Herb. Herb, can you sort of, this is very familiar to us. It doesn't differ from last year fairly at all, right? So.
It pretty much is the same thing as last year. The only thing that I updated was the Tracy Hall information that was on the second. It's in the second tab of the spreadsheet, but at the tail end of the handout that has draft stamped on it. Just a reminder for board members, and especially for Marcia, who hasn't been here before, what I've tried to do last year was to create a fee schedule that would become the familiar, if you will, for all of our fees in town. Something as for instance, when you talk about having something regularly up on the web page, this is the type of thing that we would see there. And what I try to do, the impetus for doing this is to have the board review it once a year for its approval with various updates. So the department heads have basically looked at it. We've just had this on board for a year. Right now, everything seems to be the same in terms of, because we did do some major updates last year. All I did was to update the Tracy Hall related information for how we come to the conclusion of staff time and the value of the use of the gym as for instance, in some of the meeting space rooms. So it still is familiar, but again, I'm looking to have this adopted on an annual basis, and this is the time frame that we usually do that.
Okay, Claudette, go ahead. I suspected you. Go ahead.
Yeah, there is a reference to the rec field fees, but they're not attached, and they weren't last year either, and hopefully that will be addressed.
I will look into that, yes.
Do you have any questions that you would like to ask about this? Because we have Bree in the room, so if you feel like you feel like isn't it on your web? Right, sorry, it's not right. Sorry, thank Bree's here. So we have it up on the rec registration website, and it's something that I haven't gotten printed off to attach to this. So we can, yeah, we'll have that done.
Or even
Thanks.
just a link, anything.
Yeah.
To know where to find those fees.
Yep, great.
So
I'll have that done before I send this around for the signature. I'll get digital signatures if you guys approve it tonight.
yeah, I'll work with Herb on that tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Claudette. Mary, go ahead.
Oh, just wondering in general about fees. So I think some of our programs are somewhat self-supporting, like rec, like the transfer station and so forth, to a certain percentage. How is that with Tracy Hall? Like, we're providing access, we're trying to protect our floor, of the gym and so forth. So it takes time to lay down the covering and bring it back up, takes some janitorial work. But really, I suppose the main thing is just access. It's not really to raise money, right?
Absolutely. The only thing to do is to essentially, we're not trying to make money in this at all.
Right.
It's really just to cover the costs for the true costs that are involved in the space, such as the heat, the flooring, the staff time involved in the flooring, the pickup and all that. And there's already custodial services that people pay for through the normal tax rate. Anything that's on it is in addition to that extra stuff. So if someone really trashes the gym due to a function and the custodian has to spend extra time to do that we reserve the right to hold the deposit or recover some of that. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
It's not intended to make money at all.
Right.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing.
Right.
Because access is a good
Yeah.
thing. Thank you.
Go ahead, Marcia.
This is sort of a weird thing that I noticed today on the listserv that the community nurse had said she was going to be housed in Tracy Hall in the future. And so I was just wondering, is that something that's going to get sort of billed, or how is that going to be handled?
That's what we're basically what we're doing is allowing them opportunity to have regular time, but on a very part-time basis, the utility, the use of the small conference room to have their particular meetings. So the idea is that as they get up to speed and get going, we were trying to offer some assistance on a space to locate, and should they need to grow or have their own space, that they're clearly welcome to that. But it was basically a community service to them, at like scheduling a regular conference room. That's from that standpoint. But again, this was an offer on the behalf of the town to help them get going.
And Marcia, there is a form and a process for any sort of community group to request the use of Tracy Hall, and Miranda regularly the books and facilitates that with Herb's collaboration. So,
okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, so all in favor of readopting this town Norwich fee schedule, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, unanimous. Okay, let's move on to number 8, the additional repairs for fire engine 1. Board will be asked to authorize a designated fund expenditure for additional follow-up repairs to fire engine 1. There was a memo that in the packet that detailed the additional expenditures. Can I actually begin with a motion?
I move to authorize the expenditure of up to $3,734.08 from the designated fund fire apparatus for the repairs to fire engine 1.
Yes, up to that. Is there is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? I found the memo to be comprehensive. Do we have our fire chief and town manager? Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Marcia.
Just the draft minutes from the select board from June 23rd is referencing the $30,000 that we approved. Is this under that 30,000?
No, this is addition
addition
to,
to.
remember, you may remember that there was a conversation, they would come back to us for if there was.
Okay, I remember.
Yeah.
I have to ask, is it cheaper to rent a fire engine?
Just a small question, Marcia.
That's not even a possibility.
Maybe we could have a 3D printer.
I would like to say that might be a future agenda item. Is that okay? Marcia, you're laughing. You do a big question. Okay. All right.
We should buy one and rent it out if this is an opportunity.
That'll be fun. Well, I think it's reasonable because they had identified the problem with the springs. They didn't have an estimate at the time. And the fire engine's all taken apart. So to me, it's just reasonable to get the springs fixed and spend the money, so.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I'm gonna call the, I'm gonna call the question. All in favor on authorizing this expenditure, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see all hands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think that question is worthy of a capital budgeting discussion. Should we have a future agenda item that has that? Thank you. So, okay.
Roger, Roger,
yeah.
when there's the ability to rent a fire truck, I'll be sure to let you know.
Yes. Okay. A preview of a future agenda item. Thank you, Alex. Okay. 9, pavement marking bid package. The board will be asked to authorize the town manager to proceed with the DPW director recommendation. Can I begin with a motion? Is that okay?
I move to authorize the town manager to contract with L&D Safety Marking Corporation in the amount of $23,690.40 to perform road centerline pavement marking per the recommendation of the Department of Public Works Director.
And we're asking because our purchasing policy requires her baskets, from what I understand, because of the amount. Any further discussion or questions for her?
Do you want to have a second?
Oh, is there a second? Thank you, Mary. Is that a second from Mary? No, second by Rob. Okay. So now, any further discussion? I can move on. Herb has a point that he wants to make. Go ahead.
So based on the budget that we have, the reason why we're moving forward with a recommendation as it is that we, with the bid that we received, despite our best effort at budgeting last year, we don't have enough money to do both the center lines and the fog lines this year. So the recommendation was to go forward with the center lines only, omitting the fog lines this year. With the money that is still under budget or remaining in the budget, I'm currently working with the former gentleman that used to do the in-village markings to see what we can get done with the remaining balance, because there are some real areas in the village area, the stop bars, the crosswalks, the parking spaces, those kinds of things that need to be reworked. So if assuming I get some figures from that individual, I'll be coming back to you folks to authorize the additional work with that individual.
So, and Marsha, I see your hand, but when we were preparing for this agenda item, you you talked about how one of our sort of beloved methods of budgeting is to sort of look at historical averages. Can you talk about, here we have a specific example of how that may or may have done some harm to budgeting for this. Can you speak to that a little bit? Do you mind if I put you on the spot?
Sure, that's definitely an on-the-spot question. So if you recall during your budgeting process last year and even the year before, at one point, at a certain point in the time, you start looking at sort of like your 3-year average of the last. And this is a good example of where, if you continue to do that, I mean, it's a reasonable thing to look at, but I think you have to look at the bigger picture as a whole, because what's happening is, for instance, is for the last 3 or so years, we've been under budgeted based on at least the estimates that we provided, and last year, this year, we just did the best guess that we could, but we're ending up doing that, budgeting less than what we need to do the actual work that's necessary. So, and we're going to get further away from stuff. So for instance, while it's fair to do that 3-year average, we've got to really look at what the actual costs are, because in this particular instance, I don't have enough money in the budget to do the full markings that we need to do, the center lines, the fog lines, and in the village, because of the budget that I have and because it's over budgeted. So next year when we get into the budget, I already know, at least for this year, I need $35,000 just to do the center lines and the fog lines, not including the village. And if we look at the 3-year average from what we're doing for the actuals, for instance, this year, I'm only going to spend $23,000 to do center lines. I'm not going to do fog lines or the village. So the 3-year average automatically way under budget's what you need from that standpoint. So that's just an example that I think Roger's trying to draw me toward, that I like the reasonableness of that kind of look, but you also have to be cognizant of what you've done for those actuals with regard to the budgeting process, that in this particular case is forcing us to make decisions on things that we can't do the full project on.
I imagine there might also be price increases every year too.
This year was a super price increase because of the, sorry to interrupt, but there's been because of the pandemic, there's a shortage of paint, literally. And then the schedule, because most people did not do striping last year due to the pandemic. This year, the firm L&D is super busy and they said, we're not even going to touch the village this year. We can't, we don't have time to do it.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a double whammy this year. But even just in a normal year where you're putting the best budget forward that you can based on stuff. But if you just look at it from a 3-year actual average, you're actually forcing your next year's budget to be less than what the project needs to be. That's all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, thank you for that, Herb. I thought that was instructive. Marcia, did you have your hand up?
Just a couple of things. We have one bid, and do I understand it correctly from Larry's letter that that's because nobody else bid?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we go out to formal bidding. We'll advertise it. There are a number of marking firms that he's aware of that he'll do a direct mailer off to those folks. And there are not many marking companies in the Upper Valley area. LND is one of the standards. They do all the state markings, so they're actually a very reputable firm, but they basically have a corner in the market as well.
Okay. And I guess I'm really bothered about not putting fog lines in, because it seems to me that in terms of safety, we've had so many discussions about road safety. I think if there's any way we can do it, we should try and do the fog lines.
Yeah, the priority is the center lines, the fog. Actually, a lot of the fog lines we don't do properly because the width of the roadway is too narrow. Usually you need the standard generally is to have the fog line offset from the edge of the roadway a certain amount of distance. And we can't do that given our roadway widths. That's why you see a lot of the fog lines literally right on the edge of the roadway. But this year is simply, just like last year, was making a decision on what is the best public safety marking that we can do with the amount of money that we have. The center lines happens to be that. I don't disagree with you at all with regard to the fog lines, because it just adds that extra ability to see not only the middle, but the edge of the roadway, especially in curvy areas and at nighttime. And then of course the village area is also important because that's the higher volume traffic where we need the stop bars, the crosswalks, the parking spaces, handicap spots, etc. So I'm not trying to belittle your comment. And that's a piece of why I think Roger was asking me the question as well, is that this is one of these line items that to me really needs to be fully budgeted so that we can do the whole town in a particular year without having to worry about whether we're going to do a partial or not. Last year we did what we could, but we didn't do all of the areas in town. We did, again, what we could with the budget that we had.
Okay. So we can talk about it during budget season.
Right.
Really. And weigh it out against everything else.
And I get it. There's, for the very discussion that I had on this particular, it's a specific line item in the budget. There's probably, 20 other line items in DPW that could suffer, that, could have the exact same conversation. Sure. But this is one of the ones that's a really good example of the budgeting and how decisions are made. And just, at some point, this might be one of those line items that you just recognize it's got to be at this higher one. And then you have to have harder discussions maybe on a couple other line items or
Yes.
something. Or once you get to that level where you're supposed to be, then it's easier to budget for the subsequent years. And then maybe the 3-year average is more suitable.
And I think it's creating sort of a new set of conditions to consider when you look at a spreadsheet, right? So the numbers don't tell the story that needs to be told, right? And so you need that deeper dive,
Yeah.
right? So it just sort of adds an additional labor to the work, right? Because we believe data and numbers are sort of neutral in truth, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion, or can we call the question? So I'll call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I see all hands.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the town manager contract renewal status. So the select board took action with Herb in May 25th of 2019 when we entered into a term contract agreement that is expiring on August 30th. And in that contract, there was a provision, a 90-day provision that if we were to renew, we were to give notice on June 2nd. Today, no board member has taken an action, and we have part of the contract had an improvement plan, and so we've often gone into session to discuss that improvement plan. But right now, we are certainly past our 90 days and we have not taken action. And so I'm led to believe that we are letting this contract lapse. And so at this time, I would like to take a motion on any kind of motion on relating to the town manager contract renewal status at this time. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I'd like to move that the select board authorize and initiate an immediate search for an interim town manager, utilizing the resources of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Any further discussion? Okay, I am going to roll call this. I know you're to be consistent when you choose a meeting, but I'm going to roll call this. So yes, apologies. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
I'm a yes. So go ahead, Claudette.
Roger, are you looking for a motion to not extend a new contract? Is that what you were asking for?
The motion was to, the motion that Mary made was to look to immediately begin for an interim town manager. But if you would like to make another motion, then that adds clarity, you may do so if that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, then I move that the board not pursue a new contract or an additional contract with our current town manager.
Okay.
With thanks to the current town manager for the work that he's done.
Okay. Is there a second? Is there a second? Okay. Seconded by Rob. Okay. Made by Claudia, seconded by Rob. Roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. And I'm a yes. Okay. So I think, as Claudette said, I think it is appropriate to, I think, look, like Herb has been with us through the July 17th storm, a global pandemic, and also to sort of the turnover of all of our department heads, which is not insignificant. Which is not insignificant service, right? So I think it is absolutely more than appropriate to thank Herb and wish him well. And I think there is an expectation that, and perhaps I would like board consensus on this, that perhaps Mary and I begin to have a conversation with Herb about sort of the transition, sort of his last month with us, right? And to sort of bring these conversations back to the board, either at our next regularly scheduled meeting or at a special meeting, should we decide to have that. I think it is not insignificant that, you know, we do not want an interruption to our day-to-day operations, and yeah, to say the least. So I'm seeing some nodding. So there was a question in that, right? Okay.
I would
Okay.
think
Okay. Herb, does any other board members have anything else to say?
Yeah, I'm sorry this is not working out, but I think we need to move on. You know, I'm really sorry. It's a very somber feeling in this room right now. So it's difficult. And I think we weighed it out as fairly and as thoroughly as we possibly could do it. So.
Right. Thank you, Mary. Okay, let's, if there's no further discussion, let's take our break. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording. We'll be back at it's 8:27. Let's come back at 8:35. Okay. Okay. You folks hear me? Yes. Okay, it's Wednesday, July 28th at 8:37. This will make the select board meeting. I don't see Marcia's face, but so for and the actual board is and so there's a draft of a current RFP. So, I would like to begin actually just with a question first, our drafters, Claudette and Marcia. What is it, where would you say you would like us to be by the end of our 30 minutes on this agenda item?
Sorry, Roger, I can't hear you.
So my question is, just to begin, where do you see us getting to, or where would you like us to be by the end of our 30-minute discussion on this RFP language that you provided for us?
I guess I would like to see whether or not it's an affirmation or a reaffirmation that we go forward with this. Or if we think the timing is not good.
Yeah.
But so if we reaffirm that we want to do this now, then I think we need to finalize this RFP.
Yes. Okay, Marcia, would you sort of concur with what Claudette's saying?
I do.
Okay, Mary, I lost Mary's Zoom self, but she's next to me. Mary, do you want to get back on Zoom? And then also, do you also sort of agree with what we're hearing from Claudette and Marcia? Oh, she's right there. So, the ATV has her.
I don't think I would be able to affirm the RFP based on how it's written tonight. I'm just concerned that it's a very tight time frame. It's pretty broad. I don't know how we're going to pay for it, and I don't know if it's focused enough. So I don't know. I'm having my doubts about it, whether we can actually pull it off. Like whether is it focused enough? Is it simple enough? But is it designed to do what we want to do? So I'm having my doubts about it, actually.
Okay, that's a good, so we're sort of taking a gut check, it sounds like. We've heard from others. Where are you? But
I didn't hear that.
can you hear me?
Now I can, but it was garbled.
So I'm asking Rod sort of the same sort of set of questions I've been asking everyone. Where do you want us to be by the end of this evening with this current RFP language, or how are you feeling about what is currently drafted? Or what are you thinking rather than feeling about the current? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think the language shows a great deal of improvement. I think we've made a commitment to the public to look into this, and we made some promises to move on this fairly quickly. I am curious whether or not we'll find somebody who fits the requirements of it. And I wonder what we'll do if we don't find a facilitator or, pardon me, consultant.
Yes, and so just to sort of weigh in, I'm similarly, I agree completely. I think we did make a commitment. We moved forward, right? We took significant amount of public comment from folks who wanted to see an effort of reform. We also took plenty of public comment who people didn't understand why you would necessarily seek any reform, right? So I think there was enough, we heard enough to sort of make some inquiries. I guess, I think for me, yeah, I have sort of some, I think we need to sort of scale it back and also think about a request for qualifications as opposed to a request for proposals. So I might say that we should determine a set of proposals that the board would like to see investigated, and then decide on a request for qualifications for whatever sort of expertise we would like for overseeing that, and then separately decide on what sort of public feedback component should exist, whether it's a task force, whether or not we get that sort of public input through other processes, right? So I do think that the three areas were that we wanted to engage with the public, and we wanted to provide expertise on emerging trends in policing, the relevant reform efforts that may or may not work for Norwich, and the current legal constraints on policing reform. And then we definitely wanted a report, right, that contained possible recommendations. So I think we should just sort of think of those three aspects of it, and then think about what expertise we might want to solicit for overseeing it, and create discrete budgets for parts of the project. So that's sort of like where I'm at with this. I don't know, I need to hear more or curious what that might look like, or, you know, that's what I have to say. Go ahead, Marcia.
I think in answering Mary's concern, I think we wrestled with how much do we want to direct them, right? Because you don't want to sort of pre-pack the decisions. So rather, we were looking at collect the data, which includes talking to people, and put that data into a report. The thing that I thought was going to be a problem for the rest of the board might be what the committee looked like, because that I think is important as well, right? So I think whatever we do, we should do, as Rob, I think it was Rob said, we've promised to do something. And so I think we do have to do something. And I think we can't stack the deck. And we've got to look at data. So that's what this was trying to do, not stack the deck and look at data. And as part of not stacking the deck, put together a committee that was going to be really representative of our population.
And so, and forgive me, should I respond, or should I like step back and ask other folks if they have any thoughts? Okay.
Just offering.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And so this is because I think it benefits from some direction, Marcia, and I hear the concerns. It's very clear in the proposal, right, that the board doesn't want to create any sort of, or that the writer of the proposal doesn't want to create anything that seems too directed, and I think it suffers from not having enough direction, right? So what I might say is, let's talk about data a little bit. Like, so one of the things I know from the crime research group, the sort of the data that's collected, the data that is used on the basis of sort of that oft-cited sort of UVM sponsored study by Renewal, Black and Brown. It talks about sort of the insignificant sort of data collection to sort of make claims about bias in Norwich one way or another, right? So, and there's sort of other numerous instances with like data where you might not necessarily have enough of it for it to be statistically relevant. So what I might propose is thinking through something that Brattleboro did, right, which was called data tracing. So they looked at, they didn't necessarily have a independent third party sort of collect or vet the data. They sort of accepted the existing data as it was, and asked with a committee to look at sort of these reported claims and traced it, right? So like, what is it that led to this being classified as such? What was the outcome after the interaction, right? So if someone is doing something like a welfare check, how does a welfare check get characterized as a welfare check? And how often are they, and then what is one of the outcomes after welfare check? Did they get directed to social services? Did they get arrested, right? Did they appear again 2 days later? Sort of do some kind of data work that is representative of how these calls are made. And so you sort of make a proposal about that and do an RFQ for a consultant to oversee that with the task force. And that's just one discrete task. Like, put it out there, pay the nominal amount of money, I hope that it would be, and get some answers, and then decide on the next part, right? So that's sort of, I'm not saying it has to have that kind of fidelity, but that's an example of something. You can talk about data more specifically based on what you know about the data or what you might suspect, and then just leave some room for whoever the consultant is to blow it up to the extent that it's possible or practical. Does that make sense, or are there any concerns in that narrative? I'm trying to speak with some specificity, which I would encourage the RFP to do. Go ahead, Claire.
I guess one, with the Brattleboro study, if I'm not mistaken, it was the consultants that came up with the idea of using tracer methodology.
Yeah.
It wasn't part of the proposal, the RFP, to tell the consultant what method of evaluation of data they would use. And so my response to you is that I do not think we should dictate to the consultant how they should do their work. I think we leave it, if we don't agree with how they're proposing to do their work, we don't accept their proposal.
Right. And then the only other thing I will say is you should have a sense of what you might do as a result of getting that data analysis back. And this doesn't necessarily provide any of that direction either, which is fine. But there's that.
I think it assumes that the person that we're hiring knows what to do with that data.
It does, yeah.
And I don't want to hire somebody who doesn't know what to do with that data.
And the data that would be part of the report to the board. That data analysis, however they perform their data analysis. I guess I do not want to micromanage this group and
You just
tell
want a
them.
task
what they
force to
must
do it, but yes, I understand. But go ahead, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, I'm so sorry.
So
You
I
don't
want
want the board
to evaluate the proposals. If we receive any answers, we may not get any. And then we're back to square one, and what are we going to do? And also sending it out will tell us what the price will be. And if it's prohibitive, then we'll need to come back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to do this in a more piecemeal fashion.
So you're saying that sort of finish the proposal, submit it, and then see what may come and decide if it needs to be scaled from there, as opposed to decide to scale down.
That would be my proposal, yes.
Okay. Mary and Rob, what are your thoughts on that particular point?
I don't know, unless it's significantly different and much simpler, I still have some qualms.
Can't hear her. Can't hear you, Mary.
All right. Unless the proposal is much simpler, I just can't get behind it. I just think it's too broad and unfocused, so.
I want to hear from Rob, and then I'll.
Yeah. I was pleased with the way the description of the committee evolved and seemed to be less binary. You're with it or you're against it. I think that came out well. It is very broad, and so it sounds as if we're looking for somebody in a proposal to actually, we want their work for free in the form of a proposal. That we're saying, okay, you tell us what you think would be right to do, and then we'll rewrite the proposal and request for proposal and move from there. But limiting it simply to the available statistics. Those statistics, the outcome, what type of call it really was, etc., are useful, but just limiting it, it sounded as if you wanted to limit it in to that direction initially, period. And does that take a consultant or is it a statistician?
So the question, Rob, just was, are you sort of in favor of continuing to work to modify this proposal, which we will need to take a real look at it, or board members will need to weigh in, or else sort of scaling back that proposal? That's sort of the question I'm asking. I think Marcia and Claudette are saying, you know, yes, we can have conversation about like what we should edit, but we should move on with it and then decide based on what we get back whether or not things need to be changed or altered or scope should be adjusted. I mean, we shouldn't necessarily assume that like someone who bids on something would then be open up to a very different project subsequently. You would perhaps have to go back out if it modifies considerably, and you know it is July. That's what I was saying to that. But anyway, I actually asked you a question, which I apologize, which was, yeah. Should we leave it at? You have nothing to. Do you have something to add to my sort of my digression? I'm sorry, Rob.
I just wonder if the writers, the authors, see any useful way to reduce the focus of the request of for proposal. For, you know, if there is one that makes sense, or do you feel as if would be wrong to narrow it.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, first, Rob, if you were interpreting that the data was just going to be the sort of statistics that we got from the Vermont Judicial Council or calls from to our station or whatever, no, I was thinking of this as data to include the survey and responses that we get from people, which is why we put in that stuff about, we can't promise confidentiality, that sort of thing. So it's a broad sort of spectrum. And I was thinking when I was writing parts of this, I was thinking about it in terms of this is a very interesting sort of intersection of a lot of disciplines, right? And when you are sending out like a job application for a scholar, you see these offers saying, people who should apply might have background in this, or this. And that's because you wait to see what you get, and then you see if it's going to fit what you need. And so I think if we try to, in this sort of emerging, I think, discipline of social justice and examination of police and policing, if we try to think that we know enough about something that isn't even, I don't think, fully formed or fleshed, we might be narrowing ourselves too much, which is why I think we opted for a broader brush. And then I think of this as like an offer to make a contract, okay? We're interested in this. People out there who have an expertise, make us an offer. And then we look what the offer is and decide it's going to work for us or it isn't. And I think if we don't get something out and start looking and talking, we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay, go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, I think Marcia said that very well. And that's my perspective as well.
My last concern, and then I'll start diving into some suggested edits and encourage others to do so too, is I'm wary of using public money to say that we have reviewed the status quo. And I think for folks who read through this, it takes up an apologetic or sort of defensive stance. And I think you need to inherently problematize it in order to kick something up. You need to signal to a consultant what is the context, right? And what is it that why it is that you're embarking on this. And I think this instead says, this reads directly as, please tell us everything is fine. And maybe that's what we want, or maybe what this board wants, but that is how I feel.
That certainly wasn't my intention or how I read it. So I would welcome you writing what you think would include whatever it is you think is missing.
And I know Roger did send me some thoughts that I did not find them value added. In fact, I found one of your proposals to be completely outside of the realm of this. And one of it was you making sure that the police policies were posted, or in some way asking the consultant to do that. And to me, that is not something that we should ask the consultant to do. That's our own management and leadership.
I think through that process of facilitating or working with our own management leadership, you might find that there's gaps in what is available to be posted, right? So
that may be, but that's not the consultant's job to fix. That's ours, I would argue.
The one
Okay.
thing, I think it's responsible for them to sort of oversee the public conversation about some of the department policies, and that begins with having them posted. But I digress. I'm happy to sort of dive into I'm happy to sort of step back and sort of facilitate more of the conversation as appropriate, and then dive into the specific ways that I think the proposal should change if we would like to do.
So another way we could go about this is that have two other select board members start and write something and send and bring it back and see if we can't agree to some path forward. Because I don't think we have the support for this RFP at this point in time. And I'm not sure that even listening to people tonight, I don't see that there's any way that I could go forward with what you've said, and altering this current RFP. So I would like two others to try to give it a go.
Okay, the one thing I will add for this, just to, I think so what I will say is, I think the committee that is established, I think it's a little odd and inappropriate to define what a committee would look like in an RFP. So
yeah, I had that concern as well, and
I'm happy. So I think let's take your question to the full board with appreciation, Claudette, and I hope that I'm trying to be specific. I'm not trying to sort of, at least from my point, I'm not trying to diminish any of the effort and the work that's been brought forward. But I just I think it's time to get appointed, which I think you can appreciate. So that's how I feel in that. But the one thing I'm losing my train of thought. So let's take the question: how does Mary and Rob? Do you feel like you would like to sort of take Marcia and Claudette's work and look at it further, or do you think that there is another direction that we should take at this point? I think, yeah, it's a question for Rob and Mary.
Yeah, I think it's making progress in a direction that's that I feel more comfortable with. Some of the questions I would like to see answered more fully is who is the committee that's going to be formed? Are they the ones who are looking at the RFP, the candidates and their proposals, or is it more select board and making those decisions?
So Rob, just to be clear, are you suggesting that one way forward is for us to be having this conversation?
I couldn't, you're breaking up. Sorry.
I didn't quite understand what you were saying, Rob. So
well, I'm saying that fundamentally that has made progress towards something that I could get behind. The committee aspect, even though it's better than I thought it was before, where it was explicitly saying 6 or 5 of one side and an equal number on the other, it leaves me unclear as to whether or not we're going to look at who's going to look at the applicants, the candidates for this proposal, and decide yay or nay. And is there going to be pressure that we're going to pick somebody if 3 people submit not very good proposals? Are we going to feel pressure to select one of them and call it the best of the options? But who's the one making those decisions? Who's the entity?
The proposal suggests the board, but go ahead, Marcia.
Okay, yeah, so there you go.
That's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And the only reason I thought we needed to put something in there about the committee was so that the people who were willing to respond to this and put forward a proposal would understand that it wasn't them alone. And so they knew going in that they were going to be working with a committee and kind of what it looked like. And on the other side of the coin, I think it's very important that people in town get behind this too, because this alone is going to be controversial. And so I think it's important that there's a clear understanding from the get-go that everybody is being represented as best we can make sure that happens. And that was the only reason I thought it was necessary to have something in there about the committee. You don't want to come out of this, I think, with a report that half the town thinks is skewed.
Is that not a likelihood anyways?
It's certainly a possibility, but we want to try and minimize it if we can, right?
Yeah. So how do you read that? I don't know what my opinion was.
How do I read your opinion?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe we should vote on this as is.
Sure, it should not.
Oh, no? Okay. Well,
I mean, the one thing I will also add is I think part of it is that you know, the ask was to define what it is that we were looking to investigate, decide a timetable for that work, and then a plan for implementing it. And we find ourselves drafting an RFP language. And I think this may, if I may be so humble in this conversation that might be proving otherwise, which and have some self-reflection with apologies, is that we shouldn't have been beginning with an RFP. We should have been beginning from a much more simpler place of what it is that we wanted to investigate as a board, and then directing our professional staff to shape it as an RFP, right? And so I do regret that we didn't go in that direction. That's how I feel about that. But so I think, which is just to say that like we could ask. I think part of the problem is this doesn't necessarily take the form of an RFP, and maybe it just benefits from having someone who writes them clean it up. So we could turn to her for that, and we could turn to her for that in the time he has. Go ahead, Marcia.
I think starting with the RFP was right, really, because if we say this is what we want to have investigated right off the bat, we've made decisions for the town. So I think Claudette's idea is probably best, that two other people take a stab at this, or see what Herb has to offer, you know, and then come back to the drawing board.
Okay. Is there consensus on we would need to ask, I assume we need to ask Mary and Rob if they would be willing to sort of look at this for us. I will remain a facilitator of the two.
I'm not really interested in working with it as is, because
Can't hear Mary.
I'm not interested in working with this draft as is, because I think it's too broad. I think it needs a huge amount of simplification. I wonder whether we could just hire a consultant for 2 hours for a little bit of guidance. I think it's like trying to drive a mud with bald tires. You know, I can't deal with it. It sounds sort of harsh, but I'm lost in it. I think we've kind of wandered all over the place. It was a very tense time back in the summer. Maybe we, you know, I don't know how to do this.
So Mary, can I offer you a suggestion? Because I think Claudette and Marcia are onto something with, I think it's very generous of them to say, like, look, like maybe someone else needs to sort of like flip the reins a little bit. So what I might say is there a place that you're comfortable beginning beginning from in collaboration with Rob?
No,
There's no place that you would like to begin from.
no.
So
Rob, is there a place that you would?
Oh.
is
Mary,
there- let me ask Rob and then Rob, is there a place that you feel like you can work from with the existing proposal? Is there a place that you feel like you can
Right.
exist from with this? Is there a starting
With
point
the-
for you if you were to take this?
If I were going to put together a request, I would probably want to start from scratch.
And okay.
Yeah, and so instead of, I think some of the concepts that are expressed are appropriate. And I was pleased with the sort of refinements that went there. But if I was going to be involved, it would be, okay, what do we need to know, and which problems are we trying to address?
I want to get to Marcia and then Claudette, but I feel like, you know what, I feel like bringing all the people back, right? I feel like sort of talking to everyone that we saw in the duration of like our public hearings and bringing them back, right? And sort of adding the good pressure that is needed and sort of taking their public comment. Like perhaps that is sort of, maybe we've lost that polemic a little bit, maybe because it's just now us 5 here, right? Trying to actually implement the work of what people sort of expressed they wanted, right? So I dare say, I do find that governance changes based on who's in the room. So is it that we just need that energy in all good ways?
Oop. CATV just froze.
yep.
As well as Roger.
Yeah.
Your internet connection is
You're
unstable.
back. Okay, you're back.
What did you last hear? I was sort of threatening to bring all the people back.
That's what we heard.
That's what we heard.
So my suggestion was just, I had wondered, and I'll stop and I'll take Marcia's comment. I wonder if like we just need that sort of good pressure from sort of all folks in the community to sort of like get us back, to get us back on track. Marcia, go ahead.
I just don't think that was enough people from the community. And I think that, that is selecting right there. And I'm against selecting anything, right? Because I just think that we need to be as open as possible. So I would suggest that maybe if Mary and Rob want to just start over and, bring in something, but whatever we do, it's got to be absolutely vanilla equal so that everybody can have a representation, right? If we start to place any color or prejudice of any sort, it's going to flaw the outcome of the cake.
Okay. Yes. I appreciate the point you're making. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with extending an invitation broadly to your community. I was just suggesting that's all I was suggesting. Go ahead, Claudette.
And I am not in, I don't support having another broad select board meeting, public comment session on this. We could go back and look at the tapes. And at this point, I'm going back to, okay, then 2 other select board members start from scratch and take what you want from ours, but I mean, part of the problem as well is that this has gone on for months now.
Yes.
So
I understand it. So I agree with you. So I think this is sort of so I think it makes sense to sort of proceed with 2 people looking at this. I think we should have a sort of a revision or sort of a big RFP, and then we should think about what it would look like to shape these discrete projects, and we should put that forward. And we should see what we want to do there. I think, Claudette and Marcia have done the work, right? And so if others disagree with this current work, then someone else needs to do the work, right? So So I take that point. So Mary, doesn't sound like you can be enticed. Is that right?
Budget or anything else.
Okay, that's fine.
No means
So
no, okay?
I hear you. So
Not being persuasive.
I'm not trying to be persuasive. I'm trying to get clarity. So I will work. So does it make sense for me to work with Rob at this point and bring it back to the group?
Sure.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it may be as unsatisfactory as the perception is of the current. So which is not a characterization I'm trying to put on the current. I was pleased with much of it.
Okay.
So when should we meet?
So I think we should do this as soon as possible. We should take up an agenda setting conversation about whether or not we need a special meeting, right? So perhaps this could be one of these.
Sorry, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think this needs to proceed as soon as possible. We should decide an agenda setting process over email, whether or not we need to do this. So yeah, we'll go from there. I think we should also take advantage of her and look really closely at what Claudette and Marcia has produced. Go ahead, Marcia, and then we'll just move on.
Just a final comment. I would just urge you to be cautious about how much you sort of dictate the methodology, because that might chill anybody's interest in the project. If they have an expertise and they think that we're going to micromanage it, they might just pass it by.
Right, and I think look, like maybe maybe it's just a matter of the formatting of the draft itself, right? Like I think Rob and I will sort of, as I said, maybe we'll extract some parts of it as discrete projects from your existing work and see what that looks like, and we'll do a different kind of thing, and we'll hope that you be as equally critical. This was a conversation.
We'll be there for you.
Our feelings are not hurt.
Yeah, I know, but still
That's
feel,
okay.
yes.
Well, it's something that we can all, or the majority of us can really support and feel good about. This is clearly not it.
Yeah, okay, so let's do that. And let's move on to the salacious gift policy. Amendments to gift policy and master financial policies. Board will conduct second reading and possible adoption of a revised gift policy. I sort of just took this, I sort of took these revisions on, and I, after sort of hearing some feedback, and I placed them in the packet. Claudette and I looked at some conservation statutes since this has been submitted to the packet, and the short end of that is that some conservation, we believe that some conservation laws allows for the solicitation of gifts for supporting conservation efforts, right? And so because these state policies trump whatever we decide on for our gift policies, we didn't sort of spell out any of these activities, but we do believe that there needs to be some mechanism of hearing on that nonetheless. So while that particular committee should solicit, we sort of approve. We believe that there's some approval that nonetheless happens. But this is otherwise for, just to be clear, for select board appointed committees. Anybody, I won't, go ahead, Claudette, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to point out that we do need, I believe, in the preamble or whatever we want to call it, that we need to reference that this is outside of the Conservation Commission because they are governed by specific statutes in and of themselves. And part of their responsibility is to bring to the legislative body those gifts or whatever. So they can't, I mean, even though it's, they have their own ability to seek funds. it's not something that they can do independent of anyone else, of the board or the town. That's kind of muddled, but
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I like the gift policy as presented in the packet. And I'm wondering if the concern about the Conservation Commission, that the way that it's framed in the packet is, no matter what type of solicitation or, or gift that it is, that it would have to come for approval before the select board anyway. So maybe the concern about the Conservation Commission, you could add that enabling language that's by state statute, but otherwise I think the gift policy is in really pretty good shape. And I'm inclined to accept it.
I know Marcia, you had some suggestions, so we should last if that's all right. Bobby, you have a comment?
I can't hear you.
We need a second mic is what I'm learning.
Yeah.
So Marcia, I know you had some comments, so I'm gonna I'll go to Rob to see if he has any comments, and I'll come back to you. Rob's on mute.
I like the language. If the Conservation Commission has a special instance, I do think that it is totally acceptable for committees to solicit or suggest possible donations to people, individuals or organizations, as long as what the policy says, they don't represent themselves as the voice of the town directly. And it comes before the select board.
Right, so you're referring to number 3 of the procedures where committees, subcommittees, departments, volunteers, groups, or any other actor or entity representing itself as the town may not accept or solicit donations.
Right. So it doesn't really, I think, make clear that they can, committees can try and come up with ideas that might involve gifts, but the method in which they present themselves and the method with which they would accept them, the town would accept them, is the realm of the select board.
Right. Good, Claudette.
So one of the things, Rob, that we, I think Roger and I struggled with was the fact that there have been previous solicitations by multiple groups in town that have occurred without select board knowledge.
It's inappropriate.
Or, that, yeah. So that's what we want. That's a big thing of what we want. That's a big part of what we wanted to address with this policy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you concur with that, Roger?
Yes, that's we struggled with that. And the previous version of this made sort of provisions based on dollar amounts to sort of address some allowance for that, right? And then I think our discussion last time said like dollar amounts don't necessarily reflect liability, or does it necessarily create anything more neat, right?
And the original draft of the policy just referenced, if that anything could be accepted as long as there was a line item to associate it with.
Right, the OG, the original policy. Yeah.
Yeah, the original, and didn't really reference the fact that it's all well and good to get money, but how's that going to affect your operational costs down the road?
Right.
And that's another thing we wanted to address here.
Yeah, all of that is in this policy. It sounds good. I just don't want there to be, let's say, for instance, somebody is serving on a committee who hears ideas that are of value, but realizes that it's not going to receive public funding, and says, well, let's refine this idea and I'll give you $10,000. for instance. The fact that some of that discussion is happening within the committee shouldn't cause you to reject or condemn the committee for having had some involvement with its design, with its scope.
And to that end, Rob, I think sort of anticipating what might be a committee reaction to this, right? I think there have been some concerns that this policy like may signal sort of distrust or like an allowance of some reasonable latitude or autonomy to do their work, right? And I think there's been some sort of administrative questions brought forward, right? Like, well, if I apply for like or that I have heard from some committee members where they've asked questions such as, well, if I apply for, native plants, right, to do my work, like, do you want a list of plans? And like, I often have very tight deadlines with my grant funders, and you risk sort of losing that project if things are not sort of spelled out to your expectations. And so I choose to instead think of this as what I have offered for that is that I think it's just it may be a possible opportunity to not necessarily have the a plant list, right, or even the fidelity of it, but rather sort of the idea brought forward and sort of an expression of support from the board prior to sort of this something maybe more specific. Yeah, which is to say that a process for what this looks like, it's not defined in this policy, right? So I think the first reaction is I have to go to the board for everything that it is that we look to do, every sort of material, every sort of potential interaction, and I don't think we necessarily outline a process for that. We communicate some policy just seems broad.
In general, I don't see that restriction in the policy.
Yeah.
But there's that one reference, number 3, that implies an issue that could arise if a committee does research or makes a discovery as to available monies, not from the state. But by omission, it's not there. It's just not quite as clear as I would like to see.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So this is a document that Marcia sent to me at the start of the meeting, outlines some of her changes, so we can look at that perhaps. And we also now have this on the screen. So does it make sense to look at some of these at this point?
Strictly speaking, it's late inclusion is somewhat difficult, but go ahead, stick it up.
All right, I'm like trying to download this stuff. See all my tabs.
I was going to bring these up and comment, and I realized everybody would be tired and it would be harder to visualize. So I sent them in writing.
Yeah, and that's great. I downloaded it, so now you can see it. So. Can you see that? Okay, great. Okay.
Shall I?
Sure. Yeah, we're working on that. Yeah.
So
this is we're working off of which way? Sorry, I'm a Luddite, I guess, on this. How do you want me to go for this? Oh, cool. It's a page marker. Can folks see this now better?
Can
Okay.
I make a point of order?
Yes, please.
So because this has not been included in the packet or available for any other board members to see, I do not think we can move this as adopting a policy. That would have to
Would
wait
you-
until our next meeting.
So it was shared for the purpose of sharing at this meeting. Is it appropriate to discuss this document at this time, would you say?
I think we could discuss it, but
Okay, so let's discuss it. How about that? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the action was to conduct the second reading and possible adoption of revised gift policy. It sounds like Miranda will record that by consensus we agreed to discuss the gift policy. Is that okay? So go ahead. Do you want to walk us through this, Marcia?
Sure. So I threw in some authority, which is basically the general powers and duties of a select board, because it falls under that, I think.
actually, VLC, we do have an authority, Roger. It was in that memo from VLCT, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay.
And then under definitions, there wasn't a definition for what acceptance meant. So I just threw in accepted donations shall mean the select board has approved it, and the town manager has formally accepted it in writing on behalf of the town. And then I just added a few words that I thought were, for example, where I've grayed out in that second paragraph, or any other asset that the town has been offered, because you're talking about donations, and a donation is an offer and then it has to be accepted. So I tried to clarify it by what the town has been offered and for which the donor has not received goods or any other benefit in return. And then moving down under procedures, I just put the potential donors shall be submitted, donations shall be submitted to the select board for approval. I put that in the second paragraph. I think that the answer to Rob's concern is that anybody who is talking in the town, be it in wherever, they can just refer people to the gift policy. But I think there's a very different distinction between people having conversations as they always do and is appropriate versus people soliciting on email, etc. Please give us land. I think that's very different. But I think people need to know and be told we have a gift policy. It's not insurmountable, but we just need to know what we're getting into when somebody gives us an elephant or a diamond. And then scooting down under the types of donations, I think when you're saying donations may be restricted or unrestricted, I'm kind of worried, so I added, but must be specified at the time the gift is offered. So you don't want to have things that are murky, right? If somebody says, I'm going to give you something, and then later they say, oh, but that was to be restricted for this, I thought it was understood. So that's why I put that in there. And then I've just tried to sort of add donation or gift in various places. The language there where it says whether the donation has any special restrictions, and if so, whether those restrictions are acceptable to the town. I added a number 4, which under the donations of real property, the town may require the donor to provide appropriate environmental certification depending upon history of use to ensure no discoverable hazardous conditions or environmental concerns requiring remediation. That's different from a title search, and that's where you can get into real money. So I thought that was worthy of adding. Under the donations of cash and real.
Marcia, can I stop you there for 1 second? So so both of these instances are may, right? Which
Are what?
Both of these instances the town may require. It's well, I think it's appropriate that it's may, but I wonder if appropriate environmental certification is considerably vague. It is too vague for this.
Well,
Is there
again,
common knowledge? Is there common knowledge with what environmental certification means?
I think it's going to depend on what there is there, right? Because it could be all sorts of stuff. So it's not going to be necessarily the same in terms of remediation or who's going to look at it. Just throwing it out there. Under donations of cash and real goods, legally real goods.
Marcia, I'm sorry. Mary had a question.
Mary.
I'm sorry, I have a question about the environmental aspect. So let's say that there was a property that had not been certified as a brownfield, but turned out to be. I mean, I think I need a little more clarity on that as well. Just in the language. I understand what you're trying to get at, and I think it's really good. But I'm not sure either what that actually means. So
Mary, let me just, if I may, when making such approval, the select board shall consider, and it says potential liabilities associated with the donation, such as hazardous conditions or environmental concerns. So I believe that any possible brownfield scenario would be covered under that. But and I think, you know, so there's bullet points that says, like, when you make such an approval, you need to consider, you shall consider these things, you must consider these things. And then 3 and 4 are saying that you may also wish to have a title search, and you may, in addition, have an appropriate environmental certification. So I think your issue is solved with number 2 bullet point.
Town may require, right? It's not like the person, I don't know, this is getting more complicated.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm just suggesting that your concern might be addressed by
In a different part of the policy.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Then I took out real goods and replaced it with personal property, because property is either real property or personal property. And we're talking about real property up above, and we're talking about personal property below. So that could be the diamond, the cash, that kind of stuff. And then I added a number C, creates a form of maintenance, including but not limited to cultural, technical, or historic stewardship, which is beyond the capacity of the town to provide. That addresses the concern that Mary brought up. This is, the town's going to consider all of these things when it's thinking about whether to accept something. So if somebody said to us, do you want to accept this bread oven that's ancient? And we said, oh gosh, it's got all of these things, and we're not equipped to handle that. That's why I put that in here, because it addresses the situation that just barely came up. And then I thought we needed at the end to just sort of say the process for acceptance or rejection of gifts or donations. And I added paragraph 2, the select board will determine how the gift or donation shall be used, including but not limited to making investments or selling or otherwise divesting the town of the gift or donation, consistent with any restrictions thereon or otherwise at the discretion of the select board, as may be deemed to be in the best interest of the town as a whole. And the point of that is, if somebody gives us this piece of property and they think, I love this property so much and I want it to be kept pristine, so it's going to be like Huntley Field, but the town decides that's the perfect place to put affordable housing, and we're going to sell it to a developer, we need to be sort of upfront about that and not find ourselves in a bind later legally because somebody says, oh, I want that back. You didn't use it for the purpose that I thought you were going to use it for.
But that's not in the case of specific restrictions, right, Marcia?
So
what do you mean? No,
Well,
not for
Not in
specific.
the case of a restricted gift, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Claudette, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think it's, I believe the link that Cheryl sent us about the trustee of the public funds may address this, but Roger and I received way more information and we're prior to this version, the version that we had. So the link to the trustee of the public funds piece, the Conservation Commission stuff. So I think, Roger, we probably just need to go back and
Add some
do a little bit more
sections.
work.
And the only thing I will add is number 2, the select board will determine how the gift or donation shall be used. I mean, I don't think like it's a restricted gift or it's an unrestricted gift, right? I don't necessarily, you either accept a gift with restrictions and that's understood, or you accept a gift with unrestrictions and like you have an unrestricted gift and you need to consider whatever vulnerabilities or opportunities that presents. So I don't actually think number 2 that was added is necessary at all. We have a definition section that defines restricted and unrestricted.
We do, but just to sort of give another perspective, if somebody gives something that's unrestricted, but they think that you're going to use it for the purpose that it's always been used for, this just sort of covers us and says, so if it's unrestricted, we can do what we want with it.
And I think if they have a particular use for their unrestricted gift, they should make a restricted gift. That's all.
Well, that's why there are lawsuits.
There are always going to be lawsuits.
Let's get through this policy, and then Bree has some questions, and we should, yeah. So go ahead, Marcia. Can you sort of? I think you have 2 more, and then I'll take Bree's comment.
All I did was take out the select board will consider the budgets because I moved that up, and then the last is providing an explanation on number 4. I thought the town manager, when they said, thank you very much, we want this or we don't, should obviously provide an explanation for the decision and the intended use for the gift. Again, all I'm trying to sort of impress here is you can't have arguments about stuff if you're upfront about it at every juncture. So this is an unrestricted gift. We have the right to use it as we want to. Thank you for giving us the unrestricted gift. You know, we're gonna do this with it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So do we need a third reading of this?
Well,
Oh, okay.
So I think, sorry, Mary, I think
Go ahead.
we're not, it sounds like we're not conducting any reading, we're discussing, it sounds like. So we need to conduct a future second reading of this, is what I
There
would
are other
say.
elements to be added and so forth.
That's where I'm at. Does that sound like where you're at, or?
Yep, but I think that, I think there'll be valuable additions.
Claudia, did you have your hand up, or should I take Bree's comment? Go ahead, Bree.
I just had a question. So it seems like the gift policy is looking at major sellers and major gifts. And so my department gets like $10 gifts. And, we've had some really thankful people about the Summer Matters for All grant, where their kids are getting $125 of social emotional camp for free. And so they want to donate their fees to rec as a thank you for what they're getting. So with this policy, that means that $15 gifts have to go through the select board for approval, or because I know when this was first happening, I had suggested that there be some funds under departments that are open that we can solicit for, just like a rec fund. This is for this purpose. It is a directed fund and you can give money towards this fund. But this sounds like every single gift has to be approved, which it's kind of arduous, but I mean, I understand it. It just seems like we get a lot of gifts.
The previous, so what I will just say, a previous version of this policy, they had some dollar amounts, and so for sort of these low figures, there was a reporting mechanism that was asked of what was at that time called, oh gosh, what did I call it? It was like a designated department head, I think was the term for the definition section. So if you got like, $110 gifts, we would expect a report at a certain point, but but not necessarily seek approval all of these. But that was a previous version of this policy.
So we're getting
so-
away from
So
that.
my understanding, as it's written now, is like, yes, the mechanism is that we would hear of those for approval. Do board members have a comment for that?
So can I ask
Yes,
another
go ahead.
question? So you've also said goods and services and cash and donations. So that also means that when Norwich Baseball Association decides that they want to be helpful and buy me a $56 box of balls, I need to ask you before they're allowed to use those balls and donate them to our program, because that's what I'm hearing. Because those are generally last minute decisions when I say, I'm sorry, guys, I know you really need those balls, but I can't afford them under my budget. And they say, don't worry, Bree, we'll buy them. So from what I'm hearing from your gift policy, I have to say, hold on, guys, in 2 weeks, there's a select board meeting. I got to stand up and make sure that you can buy me those balls, even though you need them next week. I just want to be clear that that's what I'm hearing, because that's what I'm hearing.
Maybe there's a workaround for that.
Do board members have comments for that? Mary suggests maybe there's, sorry, you heard Mary. Sorry, I'm like used to seeing Mary on my screen, so I'm like, Mary's right here next to me. Yeah, I know. Go ahead, Marcia, go ahead.
Well, I was going to suggest that, Bree brings up a good point, that there are certain sort of practices that really aren't about what the gift policy is about. So maybe because one of the concerns that was brought up, and I think was in the original policy, was about how it affected budgeting. And maybe what we could say at the budgeting year when we're doing that is, we're anticipating and giving permission to this department to take donations up to this amount, because it's not going to affect budgeting, right? And that would include balls or whatever it is that people might give you.
So Bree, go ahead, Claudette, and then I think there's 3 current funds that you actually have on
There
your
are.
rec website, and maybe you can actually give us those examples for clarity after Claudette goes.
So I think we go back to the version prior to this, to Roger's recent submission that had specific dollar amounts where the donation did not need to be approved by the select board. And that would answer Bree's, or that would be a response to Bree's concerns, which I think are valid.
Bree, can you sort of talk about sort of 3 existing funds that you use to sort of solicit to sort of make available opportunities for donation? I think there's like a youth advisory one, is that right?
So the Youth Advisory Council did have
Okay.
a fund to help pay for programs to provide more opportunities for the youth in Norwich who go across the river to complete their schooling, and then there's not much for them back here. So some of the youth asked if we would start a fund to help increase some programming here. We don't have the Youth Advisory Council right now. We do have a youth advisory member to the Rec Council. The other one is the Gerard Fund. Is that one you were talking about? And the Scholarship Fund. So the Scholarship Fund is very much needed. I use it every summer. There are at least 2 families that are fully funded, and several other who I fund because I know they need it. And the Gerard Fund is a special purpose fund. And we still sit for that, but only it's just on there. And then we have the gift of time. If you can't give money, you give your time and you volunteer.
And then it looks like there's also an Norwich Outdoor Recreation Fund.
Yes,
right?
we have not used that one.
Okay. So go ahead, Marcia. And then
How much money are we talking about if you sort of looked at each of those? Are we talking
So
$10,000, $2,000?
The scholarship fund right now, I'd have to ask Becky. I think we still have about 6,000 in there, but we use it every summer and throughout the year. The Gerard Fund, I'd have to ask Becky because we did fund some bases for Hunley at Gerard Field recently. And that's how they paid for the batting cage there too. But way before I started, I just know it was used for that.
So Claudette, can Marcia, did you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
Well, it just seems to me that the sums could be difficult to quantify, and that might not be the best way to do it. There might be some way that we could just make an exception for, if we can describe what they're doing, an exception for the rec because of the nature of the beast.
Does that work with $10 donations and $5 donations on that?
Well, they might if it's sort of in the aggregate. You just say
Because that's how they were all.
One of the things that Claudette and I were looking at as researching this was how specifically rec because there are some towns who have gift policies for their recreation departments, and look at, and there's department level policies or processes on level of rec. So I think one mechanism in this is you just have a section of the policy that sort of identifies, I guess, these charitable funds or this charitable giving funds and names them in policy, and then asks for some reporting on that, and sort of identifies a process for like adding new funds or what have you.
I completely support that. That's just directed giving. I think that makes sense in planning.
Isn't that really like passing through? It's not coming to the town. It's just basically stuff that's being funneled to people who need it.
Bree, it doesn't sound like it's always that way.
It's not. That's with the scholarship fund. I mean, you're funneling with a scholarship fund.
So I think, because it's 9:50, I think it might make sense for Claudette and I to maybe look. I think we've identified some issues, and I think we also need more conversation with Bree, and maybe town staff more broadly before we can finalize this. And that's what I'm hearing. Are other folks hearing that?
That sounds good. Yep.
Okay, Pam Smith, I'll take your public comment and then I might wrap this agenda item up.
Thank you. Pam Smith, trustee of public funds. I just want to reinforce Claudette's statement that the town should look at whether there's a role for the trustees of public funds in this gift policy, because some of the funds that were previously under the trustees were taken away under a previous town manager. So maybe it's time to look at whether the trustees could play a role in managing some of these gifts that come in.
Could you explain what they were, Pam? What
You
was
would have
taken
to,
away?
you would have to ask Cheryl for those specifics. I know she has said to me on many occasions that there were funds that were taken away from the trustees. So right now, all we have are cemetery funds. But Cheryl could give you more specifics. She's out of town right now. But maybe at the next meeting or between meetings, she would be a good resource for that information.
Sure, I think that, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so reach out to Cheryl. She'll be back Monday night.
Okay.
All right,
Any
thank
further
you.
discussion? Thank you, Pam, for your comment. So any further discussion or can we sort of move on for the moment? I think we have some direction.
Move on.
Okay. We just want to get to the sense of the land.
Yep, sense of the meeting.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.